Cheng Yan stirred, the sound of someone calling him, pulling him from the depths of unconsciousness. "Your Highness, wake up." The voice grew louder, more insistent, until he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. "Your Highness, my royal prince." His eyes snapped open, and the scene before him was unrecognizable. The familiar hum of his office, the glow of his computer screen, and the clutter of post-it notes plastered across his desk were gone. Instead, he was greeted by rows of small brick houses, a bustling public square, and at its center, a grim gallows. He was seated on an elevated platform overlooking the square. The chair beneath him was not the soft swivel he was used to, but a cold, hard iron seat. Beside him, a group of onlookers, including giggling young women dressed in medieval attire, stared expectantly. "Where am I?" Cheng Yan muttered, his mind foggy from exhaustion. The last thing he remembered was collapsing at his desk after days of relentless overtime work. He had barely closed his eyes before the world went black. "Your Highness, please announce your verdict soon," urged a man standing close by. He was elderly, dressed in a white robe, and bore a striking resemblance to a fantasy wizard. For a moment, Cheng thought he might be dreaming. "Verdict? What verdict?" Cheng whispered to himself, licking his dry lips. His attention was drawn to the square below, where a hooded figure stood on the gallows, their frail body trembling in the wind. The crowd roared, fists raised, and some threw stones at the condemned. The scene was something out of a historical drama. His vision, sharper than it had ever been in real life, picked out every detail of the execution setup: the weathered wooden frame of the gallows, the frayed rope, and the trembling prisoner. The faint curve of her chest revealed her gender, a woman accused and awaiting her fate. What could she have done to warrant such hatred, he thought. As if on cue, a surge of unfamiliar memories rushed into his mind. He suddenly knew she was a witch. In this world, witches were considered agents of the devil, harbingers of impurity and destruction. Execution was their punishment, and the crowd's fervor was fueled by centuries of superstition. "Your Highness?" The old man, his assistant Bhairav, urged again, breaking Cheng's reverie. The name and role clicked in his mind as though it had always been there. Bhairav was the assistant minister of finance, tasked with aiding him in governing this backward territory called Border Town. And he, Cheng Yan, was no longer himself. He was Roland Wimbledon, the fourth prince of the Kingdom of Graycastle. Sent to the fringes of the kingdom as punishment, Roland had been deemed unworthy of the throne by his father, King Wimbledon III. Is this real? Cheng wondered, his heart pounding. Have I traveled through time and become this prince? The memories were too vivid, too detailed, to be a mere dream. He grasped the enormity of his situation and quickly decided on his course of action. This was no time to ponder the impossible. Reaching for the formal execution orders Bhairav held, Roland tossed them onto the ground with a dramatic flourish. He stretched languidly and declared, "I'm tired. The judgment will be postponed." Court dismissed. The nobles seated beside him exchanged glances but did not protest. They were used to Roland's reckless behavior. However, one man did not remain silent. A tall knight clad in armor rose to his feet. "Your Highness, this isn't a joke. Witches must be executed immediately. What if others come to rescue her? The church will interfere if they hear of this," he argued. This was Carter Lannis, the chief knight. His strong frame and determined demeanor made him the embodiment of the kingdom's martial ideals. Roland met his objection with mockery. "Afraid are we? A man like you, with arms thicker than most, scared of witches? Perhaps catching more of them would make things safer, don't you think?" Carter hesitated, but said nothing more. Satisfied, Roland signaled to his guards and left the square, Carter trailing close behind. Back in the keep, Roland ordered his guards to keep Bhairav at bay and retreated to his chambers. He needed time to process his new reality. Collapsing onto the bed, he closed his eyes and tried to make sense of his memories. Why was Roland, a prince, living in such a desolate place? The answer came unbidden, as though whispered by the remnants of his host's mind. King Wimbledon III had declared that the throne would go to the child who proved most capable of governance. Each royal offspring had been assigned a territory to manage, and their success would be evaluated after 5 years. Border Town, being the most barren and underdeveloped, was a clear sign of where Roland stood in his father's eyes. "What a mess," Roland muttered. "No fair rules, no oversight, just a recipe for chaos. And now I have to play this game?" Despite his frustration, Roland recognized the opportunity. He might not care for the throne or its politics, but he now had the chance to reshape this world, and maybe even his own fate. He rose from the bed and approached the mirror. The man staring back at him had pale skin, gray hair, the royal family's signature feature, and a face that lacked the sharpness of authority. But there was a spark in his eyes, a determination born from his modern sensibilities. "Forget the past," he whispered. "From now on, I'm Roland, and I'll make this world my own." Roland secluded himself in his chambers, immersing himself in the flood of memories from this unfamiliar world. Meals were delivered to him by his servants, as he prioritized understanding his situation over social appearances. Driven by a strong survival instinct, Roland forced himself to suppress his fear and adapt to his environment. If he wished to blend in, he needed to master the nuances of this world quickly. Yet his new memories offered little of substance. Beyond childish antics with noble peers, they contained no valuable knowledge about the kingdom's aristocracy, political dynamics, or neighboring states. The city names and historical events he recalled were alien to the European history he once knew. It became glaringly obvious he had no realistic shot at the throne. Perhaps King Wimbledon III knew this as well, which explained why Roland was banished to the desolate border town. Even if he failed here, the damage to the kingdom would be minimal. The memories of his siblings only deepened his frustration. The first prince was a renowned warrior. The second prince was cunning and manipulative. The third princess was aggressive and ruthless. The fifth princess was exceptionally intelligent. Roland's impression of them was shallow, offering no insight into their strengths or alliances. It was clear he was the least favored child, sent to govern the worst territory with little expectation of success. After just 3 months in Border Town, the local nobles no longer hid their disdain. Roland's prior incompetence as a leader had sealed their contempt. Fortunately, he had inherited 2 aides from the king, one for civil matters and another for military affairs. Without them, chaos would have consumed Border Town entirely. The following morning, Roland's maid, Tyre, interrupted his musings. "Your Highness," Assistant Minister Berev requests an audience. Sighing, Roland realized he couldn't delay the meeting any longer. Trying to stay in character, he mimicked the original Roland's behavior, casually groping Tyre's behind before dismissing her to summon Berev. Her flushed reaction confirmed that his act was convincing. As she left, a thought struck him. What sort of system governs this town's economy? Farming must be central, but is there any infrastructure in place? He briefly entertained the idea of a system magically appearing to guide him, like in a fantasy novel, but dismissed the notion with a dry laugh. Reality, even in this strange world, was far less accommodating. Berev was already pacing nervously in the drawing room when Roland arrived. The moment Roland sat down, the assistant minister launched into his concerns. "Your Highness, why didn't you order the execution yesterday?" Roland waved dismissively and summoned breakfast. "One day won't make a difference. Sit down. Let's talk over food." Berev hesitated, clearly frustrated. "Your Highness, this is no trivial matter. Delaying the execution risks attracting other witches. The church won't overlook such negligence." Roland leaned back, studying the man. "Why do you believe everything the church says? That witches are evil? Isn't that just propaganda to keep people under control?" Berev blinked, caught off guard. "Your Highness, witches are dangerous, truly." "How so?" Roland interrupted. "Do they grow horns? Breathe fire? Have you seen one commit these atrocities yourself?" Berev faltered, his confidence shaken. "No, but—" "Then stop parroting baseless claims," Roland said sharply. "The church spreads these lies to justify their power. We gain nothing by blindly following their decrees." Though Roland's words unsettled Berev, the assistant minister wisely chose not to argue further. Changing deeply ingrained beliefs would take time, Roland noted. For now, he let the matter drop. Breakfast arrived, fried bread, eggs, and milk. Pouring a cup of milk, Roland handed it to Barov. You've been here since dawn, haven't you? Eat while we discuss more pressing matters. Barov reluctantly accepted the drink, but remained tense. Your Highness, there's another issue. 3 days ago, guards discovered a camp in the western forest, likely abandoned by witches. They left in haste, but a guard retrieved this from the site. Barov produced a coin, placing it on the table. Roland picked it up, intrigued. It was unlike any currency he'd seen. The material wasn't metal, but something resembling ceramic. To his surprise, the coin felt warm to the touch, as if alive. What is this? Roland asked. The emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association, Barov explained grimly. The pattern, known as the insignia of the Sacred Mountain and Magic Eye, is their symbol. Roland examined the crude carving, 3 triangles forming a mountain with an eye in the center. It appeared hand-polished, lacking the precision of minted coins. He probed his new memories, but found no mention of this association. Clearly, the original Roland was as ignorant as he had been. Barov continued, the Witch Cooperation Association is a recent development. In the past, witches lived solitary lives, hiding or fleeing from persecution. But now, they've begun to organize, gathering witches to seek the so-called Holy Mountain. And what's the Holy Mountain? Roland inquired. It's said to be a place where witches are free from the devil's corruption, Barov explained. But it's more likely the source of their evil. Ancient texts describe it as a gateway to hell. Roland's skepticism grew. The parallels between this world's history and his own were uncanny. Religious institutions wielding fear to control the masses? It was all too familiar. Barov added, the Church's punishment army was formed to suppress witches. They've been effective. Witch-related disasters are rare compared to a century ago. But the Witch Cooperation Association complicates things. In places like Clearwater Port, reports of missing female infants have surfaced. Rumors blame the witches, claiming they seek to create more of their kind. As Barov spoke, Roland's mind raced. He needed to tread carefully. The Church's influence was deeply entrenched, and open defiance could provoke disaster. Yet the notion of burning witches at the stake sickened him. If these women truly possessed magical abilities, they could be allies rather than enemies. Barov, Roland said finally, keep this coin secure and have the forest monitored. But remember, fear blinds people to the truth. We'll deal with witches intelligently, not through hysteria. Barov bowed, still uneasy but obedient. Roland returned to his thoughts. This was no simple medieval world. To survive and thrive, he would need to challenge the Church's authority, reshape societal beliefs, and harness the potential of the witches. The game had begun.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
After Roland ate the last piece of fried egg from his breakfast, he took a napkin and wiped his mouth before saying, So, are you saying that you're worried that the Witch Cooperation Association will try to rescue the witch when they hear the news that she did not die? It's as your Highness says. Barov stamped his feet and exclaimed, I hear that they're in a hurry and probably on their way to somewhere. Had that prisoner died, and then it can't be helped, but she's still alive. If those witches are crazy enough to steal babies, I'm afraid that they won't forsake a degenerated companion. Roland was somewhat confused, and he could not help but feel that there was something amiss about the situation. Why is it that my assistant minister and chief knight speak of witches as if they're a forthcoming and formidable enemy? The woman who's to be executed is a witch, right? She's so thin that even the wind seems like it can blow her off her feet. If she truly possessed frightening power, why would she be standing there and awaiting her death? No, she wouldn't even be caught. According to the Church's explanation, she's a devil incarnate, and therefore the punishment army and other military troops would suffer losses if they fought her. Yet, she was caught by the normal citizens of Border Town and was tortured by every means possible up until she was led to the gallows. But there was still no sign of her frightening power. How did she get caught? Roland queried. I heard that when the North Slope Mine area collapsed, She revealed her identity in order to escape and was then captured by angry villagers, Bhairav answered. I've a certain impression of this matter, and it happened right on the day before I traveled through time, Roland thought. How did she reveal herself? The prince asked aloud. Oh, well, I'm not sure. The assistant minister shook his head and said, the situation was very chaotic, and it could be that someone saw her using witchcraft. Roland frowned as he asked, aren't you able to investigate the situation properly? Your Highness, our priority is to restore the production of the mining area, the assistant minister retorted. Half of our revenue is derived from the iron mine, and what's more, the guards have confirmed that someone at the scene was killed by witchcraft. What kind of witchcraft? Roland asked, becoming more interested than before. The head and a large part of the body were spread out on the ground, as if they were melted. They reminded people of burnt-out black candles. Bhairav's face was filled with disgust. Your Highness, you wouldn't want to see such a scene? Roland played with his silver fork as he pondered over the issue. Historically speaking, most of the victims who were hunted by the Witch Cooperation Association were innocent people, and thus, the witches bore the brunt of the church's and the ignorant people's anger. In truth, a small percentage of witches had sought their own deaths. This group of witches dressed bizarrely and spent their days mixing all kinds of materials in large pots, claiming that they could predict the future and knew the conclusion of life and death. They based their legitimacy around a few tricks, for example, making use of a natural flame reaction to prove that they had obtained the power of God. To a modern person, these were nothing but some simple chemistry tricks, but in medieval times, it was easy to mistake them as godly phenomenon. As for melting people, the first thing that Roland thought of was a chromic acid solution. However, the preparation for this was tedious, and the process itself required the entire human body to be immersed in the chromic acid. Furthermore, the melting effect was definitely not as strong as the melting of candle wax. And chromic acid was the strongest of the known acids. Then how did she do it? If she relied on alchemy, that meant she could have been a chemist, which was very rare in the whole territory. But if not, Roland thought until here, and then said in a determined tone, take me to see her. The assistant minister stood up in a flurry and accidentally knocked over the cup of milk that he had not drank. Your Highness, you want to see the witch? Yes, this is a command. Roland looked back and smiled at the assistant minister. In a way, he was thankful for Prince Roland's unreasonable style. As Roland walked over to the door, he suddenly paused and asked, right, I always wanted to ask why we use the gallows. What? Roland reiterated his question. Why the gallows? Shouldn't witches be burned at the stake? Bhairav seemed puzzled. Is that so? But she's not afraid of fire. There was only one dungeon in Border Town, because such a barren land could not afford to upkeep too many prisoners. Most criminals would face trial within a few days and either be released or executed. In addition to Bhairav, the prince was followed into the dungeon by the chief knight, the prison warden, the castellan, and 2 guards. The dungeon had a total of 4 floors, and its walls were made of hard granite blocks. It was Roland's first time in this kind of place. He noted that the deeper down he went, the narrower the hallway became, and the lesser the number of cells. He imagined that the builders probably dug a pit in the shape of an inverted cone first, and then piled it up with layers and layers of stone. This type of crude engineering project would naturally not provide for a good drainage system. The ground was always very wet, and muddy flowed down the stairs, all the way to the last floor. The witch was imprisoned in the bottommost floor of the dungeon. Every floor down they went, the stench in the air became thicker. Your Highness, you're risking too much by doing this. Even though she's sealed with God's locket of retribution, it isn't completely safe. It was Carter Lannis, the chief knight, who spoke. As soon as he learnt that the prince was planning on visiting the witch, he immediately rushed over and pleaded with the prince to turn back. He did not accept the prince's command and refused to leave, not when the prince seemed to blatantly disregard his own safety. How could such a tall and handsome man be such a bugbear? Roland thought. He wished that someone would just sew Carter's mouth up. If you don't even dare to look evil in the eye, how will you have the courage to defeat it? I thought you knew that, he said. Before fighting evil, one must know one's strength. Reckless behavior is not courageous. Carter rebutted. You mean to say that you'll uphold justice against an inferior enemy, but turn a blind eye to a superior enemy? Roland challenged. No, Your Highness, I mean, Carter stammered. Before this, you were afraid of a witch raid, and now you're even afraid to see a little girl. My chief knight is indeed one of a kind. Although the chief knight was talkative, he was not proficient in debate, and thus was helpless against a smooth talker like Roland. Soon the party reached the bottom floor of the dungeon. This floor was many times smaller than the ones above, with a total of only 2 cells. The castellan lit the torches on the walls, and as the darkness faded, Roland saw the witch curled up in one corner of her cell. It was already late autumn, and the temperature in the dungeon was low enough for people to see white fog when they exhaled. Roland wore a fur coat with silk lining inside, and thus he did not feel cold, but the girl only wore a thin garment that did not fully cover her body, and hence her exposed arms and legs were frozen white. The suddenly lit-up torches made her turn away and close her eyes. But soon, she was able to open her eyes and look straight at the party. It was a pair of pale blue eyes that resembled a calm lake before the onset of heavy rains. There was no fear on the witch's face, and neither was there any sign of anger or hatred. For a moment, Roland had an illusion that he was not looking at a weak little girl, but instead a shadow that devoured flames. He felt as though the torches became a little dimmer. The girl tried to stand up against the wall, but her sluggish motion made her seem as if she could fall down at any time. Eventually, she was able to get on her feet and hobbled her way towards the light. This was enough to make most of the party members gasp in horror and take 2 steps backwards. Only the chief knight held his ground and shielded the prince. What's your name? Roland patted the knight on the shoulder to indicate that he did not need to be so nervous. Anna, she replied. Can you clearly describe what happened when the mine collapsed? Roland asked. Anna nodded and began talking. Roland was surprised because he expected her to stay silent or to angrily curse at him, but she responded to all of his questions cooperatively. It wasn't a complicated story. Anna's father was a miner and was working when the mine collapsed. Immediately after they heard about the accident, Anna and the other miners' families went to rescue their loved ones. The North Slope mine area was rumored to be an abandoned monster lair, with many forked pathways extending in all directions. Since the volunteers were all acting on their own accord, they separated at the mine entryway, and only Anna's neighbors Susan and Ansgar were by her side when she found her father. Her father's leg was crushed under a cart filled with ore, rendering him motionless, but at his side was another miner patting him down for money. When the looter saw them, he rushed at Ansgar with a pick and knocked him to the ground, but as he was about to strike her, Anna killed him first. Anna's neighbors vowed to keep her secret and helped Anna rescue her father. However, early next morning, Anna's father went out on his crutches and reported to the patrolling guards that his daughter was a witch. Why? Roland couldn't help but ask. Berev sighed and answered, probably he could receive a reward. Discovering and reporting a witch can get you 25 gold royals. For a man with a crippled leg, 25 gold royals would take care of him for the rest of his life. After a moment of silence, Roland asked, Your opponent was a strong adult man, so how were you able to kill him? Anna laughed, and the flames of the torches began shaking like waves on a lake surface. Just as you think, I used the power of the devil, Anna said. Shut up, vile sorceress, shouted the prison warden, but everyone could hear his voice trembling. Is that true? I want to see it, Prince Roland said unwaveringly. Your Highness, this is no laughing matter. The chief knight interjected as he furrowed his brows. Roland stepped out from behind his knight and walked towards the cell. If anyone is afraid of her, I won't ask them to stay here. Don't panic, she has a god's locket of retribution around her neck, shouted Berev to comfort everyone, but probably mostly himself. No matter how powerful the devil is, he cannot overcome God's protection. Roland stood in front of the cell bars, an arm's length away from Anna, and could clearly see her dusty and bruised face. Her soft facial features showed that she still was a minor, but her expression contained no trace of childlike innocence. There wasn't even anger in her face, giving her an unsettling feeling Roland had only seen on TV. It was the face of a wandering orphan who had suffered from poverty and hunger, but it was also not exactly the same. Those children always stood with a bent and broken body and a lowered head in front of cameras, but Anna did not. Up until now, she had tried to stand straight with her vision raised and calmly looked into the prince's eyes. She does not fear death, Roland realized, and she is waiting for death. Is this the first time you have seen a witch, my lord? Your curiosity might get you killed, Anna said. If you really had the devil's power, you would be able to kill with a glance, Roland responded. If that were true, it is not I who should fear death, but your father. The prison torches suddenly dimmed, which was definitely not an illusion, as the flames seemed to be smothered into small sparks. Roland heard the panting and prayers of the men behind him, as well as the thuds of people who had tripped while trying to run away. Roland's heartbeat sped up, and he felt that he was at the border between two worlds. On one side was the world of common sense, which was in exact accordance with the laws and constants that he knew. On the other side was an incredible new world, which was full of mystery and the unknown. He was standing in front of this world. Was the thing around her neck God's locket of retribution? What a simple and crude locket, Roland thought. It was a red iron chain with a sparkling and translucent pendant, which seemed easy to destroy if the witch hadn't been handcuffed. Roland glanced at the crowd behind him, who were still mouthing prayers in panic. He quickly reached into the cell, grabbed the pendant, and tugged on the locket, snapping the chain. The move startled even Anna. Come on, Roland whispered. Are you actually a liar, some type of alchemist, or a real witch? If you take out bottles and jars and start compounding acids, I will be disappointed, Roland thought. Roland then heard a crackling sound, the noise of water vapor expanding in heat. Their surroundings began to heat up rapidly, and the water on the ground was turning into steam. Roland saw a blazing flame rise from beneath Anna, and the ground she was standing on was set on fire. The torches behind them exploded at once, as if they had received pure oxygen, giving off a blinding light. At that moment, the whole cell was as bright as day, causing the onlookers terrified screams. As the witch moved forward, the flames surrounding her moved with her. When she came to the edge of her cell, the iron bars that made up the wall became pillars of fire. Roland backed up instinctively from the biting and painful heat. In just a few seconds, he felt that he was back in summertime, but this was a different kind of heat, which was solely generated by a flame, rather than an enveloping summer heat. One side of his body was facing the flame's heat, and the other side was still chilly. Roland could even feel cold sweat trickling down his back. She really does not fear fire, Roland thought. Roland remembered the assistant minister's words. Only now did he really understand what he meant. If she is an actual flame, how could she fear herself? Soon, the iron bars turned from crimson to a light yellow and began to melt. This meant that they were being heated to over 1,500 degrees Celsius, a temperature that seemed practically impossible to Roland to achieve without insulating measures. Like the others, he backed away from the cell, holding himself firmly against the furthest wall. If he had not done this, the heat of the melting iron would cause his clothes to combust even without direct contact. Even Anna's clothes were reduced to ashes and replaced with a ball of flames. After what seemed like eternity, the flames disappeared. All that was left were a couple torches quietly burning on the wall as if nothing had happened. But Anna's burned clothes, the hot air, and the twisted prison bars all proved that this wasn't an illusion. Besides Roland and the chief knight, the other men had all collapsed to the ground, and the prison warden was so scared that he soiled his pants. Anna now stood naked outside the cell, and her arm shackles were gone. She did not hide her naked body, her hands hanging naturally at her side, and her blue eyes appearing as peaceful as before. Now that I have satisfied your curiosity, my lord, she said, can you kill me now? No. Roland stepped forward, wrapped his coat around her, and said with a forcefully gentle tone, Miss Anna, I want to hire you. The second law of thermodynamics. Heat can never pass from a colder to a warmer body without causing other effects. Or it is impossible to convert heat from a single source into work without causing other effects. Or entropy always increases in an irreversible heat reaction. Roland carefully wrote this down using the language of this world. At a glance, The text resembled a moving earthworm, and he really didn't understand how the locals could learn so many complicated characters. If asked which of the physical laws was the most depressing, Roland would definitely choose the second law of thermodynamics. It states that heat will always pass from high to low temperatures, thus adding chaos to order and increasing entropy. Eventually, everything will become nothing and the universe will become morbidly silent. Somehow, this world was exempt from the issue of increasing entropy. It could produce magic power out of nothing, which was much more impressive than a perpetual motion machine. The forces of evil? Roland scoffed to himself. The people here don't see the nature of this power, which could possibly change the entire universe. Of course, he could start by changing this small border town. Roland hummed a tune, tore up the paper he had written, and threw it into the fireplace, where it was reduced to ashes, feeling a sudden joyous freedom. The assistant minister was confused by Prince Roland's actions, but fortunately for Roland, the old prince had always acted this strangely, and Barov could see that the prince was in a good mood. "It's been done. The witch was hanged at noon," reported Barov. "Good. Can anyone tell?" Roland asked while writing. "All of the condemned wear hoods anyways." In order to prevent trouble with the Holy Church and the Witch Cooperation Association, Roland ordered the prison warden to find a death row criminal with a similar figure and use her to replace Anna at the gallows. Besides the chief knight and assistant minister, everyone who was with him in the dungeon was given 20 gold royals of hush money, which was a huge amount for them. Barov even suggested killing all of the witnesses to ensure total silence, but Roland rejected this. He knew he couldn't prevent this secret from spreading, but this didn't matter because he actually wanted someone to spread the word, just not now. He would clash with the church sooner or later, since he couldn't tolerate those idiots would waste such valuable resources. If other witches heard there was a town where they could live freely and even get special treatment, what would they think? No matter the era, talent and human resources were the most important. "Good," Roland said. "And next I need you to give me a summary of the past year's trade, taxes, and expenditures. I would also like you to record the numbers and sizes of steel, textile, and pottery workshops in the city. I'll need 3 days to prepare these records, but—" Barov first nodded, but then fell short of words. "What is the matter?" Roland asked, knowing that his ability to lie was about to be tested. Barov undoubtedly had questions about what happened yesterday, since although a scoundrel would always be a scoundrel, having a bad character didn't also mean being brainless. In the eyes of the assistant minister, harboring a witch was akin to declaring war on the world. "Your Highness, I don't understand." Barov wrestled with his words. "Although you've caused trouble in the past, it was always harmless, but now, risking so much only to save a witch? It was the church that passed the law to hunt them, but even your father, His Majesty Wimbledon III, supports it." Roland thought for a moment and asked, "Do you believe that this border town is a good place to live in?" This... Barov didn't understand what this question had to do with the problem, but eventually answered truthfully, "Not really. It's awful. Compared to Valencia or the port of Clearwater. What do you feel my chances are against my siblings of gaining the throne?" The assistant minister opened his mouth, but didn't answer. "Almost zero. So, I can only choose another path." Roland watched expressionlessly as Barov walked into his trap. "A path that would even impress my father." He did not argue that witches were not inherently evil, because it would be useless. Barov had been the assistant minister of finance for 20 years and was a pretty competent politician. For politicians, personal gain was more important than moral law. Also, if Roland recalled the previous prince's actions correctly, using emotion wasn't typical of him because he wasn't considered as a righteous person. So, he chose to use the eternal conflict between religious and secular authority, as the expanding power of the Holy Church was a constant issue for Wimbledon III. The Church claimed that the world worked under the will of God and that the Pope was the voice of God. If the people found what he said was full of lies, the dominance of the Holy Church would be greatly undermined. It would be hard to convince the assistant minister by saying, "Witches are not evil, so I want to save them," but replaced with "Witches are not evil, and I can use them to attack the church." Barov could easily be persuaded. No matter how the territories of my brothers and sisters flourish, everything will eventually be in the possession of the church. They had already declared the divine right of kings, which states that rightful rulers must be blessed by the Pope. So are we even the real rulers of this land? Roland paused and said, "My father will see a new hope in me, a leader who isn't suppressed by the church and who holds all the exclusive rights of a royal king. And his choice will be very clear then. Changing the enemy of the entire world into an enemy of only the church was easier to accept, especially since Behrov himself stood on the side of the royal family. Similarly, if he realizes that witches have extraordinary powers that could aid in fighting the church, the execution orders will be nothing more than a joke. While there is no possibility to guarantee success, it's not impossible either. Do you think it's worth the risk?" Roland stared at the assistant minister as he said, "Don't doubt me, Behrov. You've been an assistant minister for 20 years, right? If I could become Wimbledon 4, I could remove the assistant part, or even make you hand of the king." Watching Behrov leave, Roland felt relieved. It was obvious that he didn't think much of this promise, which was normal, since even Roland himself did not believe that this hasty and bold plan could be achieved. However, it was more important to convince Behrov of his seriousness. This simple plan, thought up by a sheltered noble son, reflected Prince Roland's hatred towards the church and paved the way for attracting more witches. As for his real thoughts, even if Behrov knew, he wouldn't be able to understand them. Roland summoned the maid. "Tell Miss Anna to come to see me." Now back to business, Roland thought happily. In the castle backyard stood a single cottage, which was covered with wooden planks and had 2 windows. There was a pond in front of the cottage with a circumference of roughly 9.5 yards, and it was filled with river water, making it not only fire-resistant, but also modifiable. Piled atop the ground were several iron ingots, which came from a blacksmith and were placed there by Carter. Roland had chosen this location for the cottage because of its proximity to a well, but it was still too crude to be a laboratory. He shook his head, realizing that building a perfect lab overnight was not possible. He would need Behrov to collect the resources before he could build an official workshop. "How are you? Did you sleep well?" Roland turned around and asked Anna, who seemed confused. The witch in front of him and the witch he saw yesterday were 2 completely different people. After a thorough bath, her long flaxen hair draped over her shoulders like a shawl and had a soft luster. Her skin glowed with vitality, and a light dusting of freckles on the bridge of her nose added a youthful vitality to her face. Her body was still so thin that a strong breeze could topple her, but her cheeks were rosy and the bruises and marks on her neck had faded. Roland suspected that magic power not only gave witches extraordinary power, but also improved their health. Anna's recovery rate was much faster than the average person's. "Since you experienced so much difficulty, you should be allowed to rest for a few days, but our time is limited, so I'll make it up to you later." Roland walked around the girl. "Does your dress fit well?" Anna wore clothes that he had carefully selected to satisfy his lewd tastes. The protective clothing that iron workers wore was too thick and unsuitable for her, while the elegant and classy robes many mages wore in games actually restricted mobility and would quickly be turned to ashes. As for maids' dresses, was there any better clothing than this? Even though this world had no modern maid outfits, it was not an issue since the current maid clothes were similar to those of later generations. Thus, Roland took a set of clothes from Tyre and cut it to Anna's size, shortened the skirt, shortened the sleeves, folded the collar, and added a bow, thereby creating the new witch uniforms. This was accompanied by a witch hat, customized, black boots, ready, as well as a knee-length cape, tailored, and Roland found himself looking at a character he had only seen in movies. "Your Highness, what can I do for you?" Anna asked. Anna really could not keep up with the ideas of this man, and she felt that she was losing her judgment. As she was dragged out of the dungeon with a bag over her head, she thought she would soon be free from her cursed life. However, after taking off the bag, Anna found herself not in the gallows or the guillotine, but a magnificent room. Then a bunch of people flooded in and began undressing and bathing her from her armpits to her toes, leaving nothing unpolished. Next was her clothing, and Anna didn't expect that someone would help her get dressed. She also never knew that clothes could be so comfortable that they laid gently on her body and created no friction at all. Finally, a bearded old man entered the room, and after he ordered everyone else to step out, he placed a contract in front of her. At this moment, Anna realized that the man who said he wanted to hire her in the dungeon was actually Prince Roland of this kingdom, and that he wasn't joking. The contract clearly stated that if she worked for the prince, she would be paid a gold royal every month. Anna knew how much a gold royal was worth. Her father's pay as a miner was determined by the amount of or he mined, but even his best haul was only worth 1 silver royal. 100 silver royals were equal to a gold royal, and this still depended on the purity of the silver royals. So, was her job to sleep with the prince? Anna had heard the maids whispering this while she was bathing, but she didn't think she was worth this price. Her blood was tainted by the devil, so anyone who knew of her identity avoided her at all costs. Even if the prince's curiosity was so compelling that he didn't fear the devil, he didn't need to pay her. However, no one came in her bedroom that night, and she fell asleep peacefully. It was the softest bed Anna had ever slept in, so she lay down and immediately fell asleep. When she woke up the next day, it was already noon, and lunch was being served in her room, consisting of bread, cheese, and steak. She had been ready to die, but after tasting the luxurious meal, Anna could not but start to cry. The sauces and seasonings exploded in her mouth with a strong spicy flavor mingled with a sweet taste, attacking her taste buds. Suddenly, she felt that the world was a little bit brighter. Anna felt that if she ate this food every day, she would even have more courage to fight the demons that attacked her body. Standing in this garden that looked nothing like her prison cell, Anna secretly made up her mind. Since the prince needed her, whether wearing strange clothes or even using the devil's power, she was willing to try. So, she repeated her question, but without hesitation this time. "Your Highness, what can I do for you? Right now, I want you to learn to control your own strength. Practice it over and over until you can send out and retract your flames freely." "You mean the devil's?" No, Miss Anna," Roland interrupted her. "This is your power." The witch blinked her beautiful blue eyes. Most people in the world have the misconception that witches' power belongs to the devil and is incredibly evil, but they are wrong. Roland bent down and met her at eye level. "But you already figured that out, right?" Roland remembered Anna's chuckle in the dungeon. Would a person who felt she was evil laugh with such self-mockery? "I didn't use my power to hurt anyone else," she murmured, "except that looter. Self-defense is not a sin, and you did the right thing. People fear you because they do not understand you, and they only know that training will lead to power, but they do not know how to become a witch. Unknown power is always scary." "You're not afraid," Anna said, "because I know your power belongs to you." Roland laughed. "But if that looter had such incredible strength, I wouldn't be able to stand so calmly in front of him." "Well, let's get started," he said. The fire rose up from her feet but quickly dispersed. That had been her 23rd attempt, and she had failed again. On Anna's forehead, beads of sweat constantly appeared, but she used the back of her hand to wipe them away, and the crackling sound of rising flames went out. Without stopping to rest, the end of one exercise was immediately followed by the start of the next. The witch's uniform lay at her side, neatly folded. If Anna had not insisted on doing so, her new uniform would have already been burned to ashes. Fortunately, given Roland's identity as the fourth prince, getting a few spare robes for her to practice in was not difficult. He had his maid Tyre deliver a whole bucket of robes, gathered by the maids for Anna to use. The 24th attempt had finally been successful. The flame no longer came from her feet. Instead, it appeared in her hands. She gingerly moved her arm to try and have the flame go to her fingertips, but the flame suddenly shook twice and engulfed her arm, setting her sleeve on fire, spreading from the sleeve to engulf the whole robe. Anna dispelled the flames, but her robe was already completely burnt and unusable, so she turned to the bucket and got a new one. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but whenever it did, Roland would look away. He would stare off into the distance, even if Anna herself didn't care. In fact, if it weren't for Roland's strong objections, she would probably have taken off all of her clothes and practiced in the nude, in broad daylight. But even if Roland would look at her, he wouldn't be able to work well with a naked girl, especially when that girl burst into flames and her body gave off an entirely different kind of energy. Roland shook his head, removing such impure thoughts from his mind. For the moment, it seemed very difficult to master the use of magic. Roland had instructed Anna to try to control the fire to such a degree that she could release flames from her palm or her fingers without destroying her own clothes. However, he also wanted the flames to be hot enough that they could melt the pig iron ingots that were in the yard. After Anna's 30th attempt had failed, but before she could begin the next one, Roland stopped her and told her to take a break. Anna looked startled, but she gave no other response. Roland had to walk over and even pull Anna by her hand, leading her to a chair and forcing her to sit down. "You are tired. When you are tired, you need to rest. Do not be too impatient. We still have some time." He helped her wipe the sweat from her forehead and said, "Let us have some early afternoon tea." Roland knew that the noble of the Kingdom of Graycastle were not in the habit of drinking afternoon tea. Since this world's economy was underdeveloped, the vast majority of people would not have the opportunity to taste such delicious food. The people in this world were not familiar with the idea of eating 3 meals a day, not to mention a fourth one. As for the sons of nobles, they generally gathered together in the afternoon at bars or casinos. If Roland wanted to introduce the custom, he had to prepare the food and drink himself, for the maid and the cook were not familiar with it. Since prepared some light refreshments and they didn't have any tea, he was forced to use ale as a substitute, but it would be important to get some tea in the future. So, in a wooden cottage in the castle backyard, the first afternoon tea party of Graycastle was held. Anna looked at the dishes of exquisite snacks, not believing her eyes. How could food look so beautiful? Although she did not know the name of the cake she ate, it was a pure white, and the bright red collection of fruit could make a person's mouth water. The edges of the pastries were decorated with exquisite patterns. This experience exposed her to things she had never seen before, forcing her to change her view of the world once again. Roland proudly observed Anna's expressions. She looked stunned, but also slightly frightened. Although the strawberries on the cream cake were marinated in sugar and didn't even taste fresh, Anna ate the whole thing. Roland found that watching the witch's face while she ate was more satisfying than eating himself. Roland observed Anna, who was carefully placing the cake into her mouth, her blue eyes twinkling and her hair gently swaying in the wind. Seeing all this, his heart suddenly beat faster, and he thought to himself, why would anyone eat food which is not only delicious, but also beautiful? Well, these strong feelings were also very important. Watching Anna while she practiced and having afternoon tea with her became Roland's daily routine. He had not shown any interest in government affairs. Barav helped him to take care of any issues so that everything was in order. 3 days later, Barav delivered the information on the border town's industries that Roland had asked for to his office. This was an unbelievable moment. The former fourth prince had never actually had the patience to see such a large pile of complicated reports. In fact, even now he still didn't have it. Roland needed only to read 2 lines of text before he began to feel dizzy, and he told Barav, "You'll read it to me?" He spent an hour listening to Barav read the reports before he found a mistake. Why did the border town have no trade revenue or annual taxes in the winter? Since the winters were so cold, the lack of agriculture revenue was reasonable, but how could it be absolute zero? Did the local people hibernate? Barav coughed. "Your Highness, have you forgotten? During the winter months, the months of the demons takes place. Since the town cannot guard its borders, all of the residents must evacuate to Longsong Stronghold. But rest assured, your safety is certainly our main priority." Months of the demons? Roland seemed to recall having heard that phrase before. He personally didn't believe the tales of ghosts and the legends of wicked witches, and he privately considered it to be part of this uncivilized world's nonsense and superstition. But now it seemed that the monsters were not myths, since witches did actually exist. Then, what about other famous legends like ghosts? When he was receiving his education, his history tutor had told him the story of the month of the demons. Every winter, after the first snow fell and the sun had disappeared behind the mountains, an intense darkness would descend upon the world. At that time, the gates of hell would open and release demons into the world. The evil spirits would corrupt living creatures and turn them into the slaves of the devil. Some of these animals would change into powerful demonic beasts that would attack humans. Most witches were born during this season and would be much stronger because of it. Have you seen the gates of hell? Roland asked. Your Highness, how could we ordinary people see them? Bear shook his head repeatedly. Don't say such things. The mountains they come from cannot be conquered. Even being close to the mountains means you'll be affected by the foul miasma. First you get a mild headache, and then you can lose your mind in the most severe cases. Unless what? Unless the person who goes to the gates of hell is a witch. Only a witch would be able to travel to the gates of hell because they have fallen from grace and become the devil's minions. Naturally, they don't need to fear the evil forces, Bear said, glancing in the direction of the backyard. Have you ever seen one of these demonic monsters? Roland said, knocking on the table to recapture the attention of the assistant minister. Well, I personally haven't seen them. Like you, this is my first time I have ever been to the kingdom's borders. In the capital, only a few people there have encountered real demons. If he needed to evacuate once a year, how would Roland be able to develop the border town? He initially thought that the border town was a barren land, but that it could be developed. That now seemed to be a pipe dream. Since we can hold of the demonic beasts at Long Song's stronghold, and since they aren't invincible and they can be killed, then why can't we defend this border town as well? Long Song's stronghold has a very high wall. Also, Duke Ryan's elite troops are stationed there. It is nothing like this border town. This small town cannot be compared to it, Bear explained. First, the border town was established to provide an early warning to the stronghold. Therefore, the town was set between the North Slop Mountain and the Redwater River. It seemed that the border town only existed to slow down the demons. It was the only path they could take to reach Long Song's stronghold. Roland laughed at his bad luck. If Roland wanted to develop the border town, he would have to put down roots. Even though the area was a wasteland, it could easily be reclaimed and improved. If the size of the territory was too small, people could expand outwards. However, all of talk was useless if no one was willing to stay. If they could be forced to abandon their land at any time, then who would be willing to purchase it? Who will want to improve it? After the assistant minister left, Roland called in Chief Knight Carter and ordered, "Assemble your men and go and find some of the local guards, hunters and farmers who have lived here for more than 5 years. Ask them if they have experienced the months of the demons. If you find someone who has fought a demon, that would be even better." After the knight saluted and left, Roland rubbed his forehead and continued to look at the data compiled by the assistant minister. The border town primarily exported products from hunting and mining, and mainly imported food. Everything was transported directly along the Redwater River to Long Song's stronghold or Willow Town. The mining exports included all kinds of minerals such as iron, copper, sulfur, crystal, ruby, and sapphire, etc. This was completely against the concept of associated minerals. He thought about what Anna had said to him. The North Slope mine area was rumored to be an unknown underground lair, and until now there had been no proven bottom to the mine. It was also unknown how far the mine extended. The minerals the town exported weren't paid for with the kingdom's gold royals, but instead they were traded for the foodstuffs that arrived. It seems reasonable that since the gems were a high-priced luxury, in these last 5 years the border town should have saved a surplus of food, but there was nothing left. In other words, the annual mining production of the border town was only enough to feed 2,000 people. Before the prince had arrived, the border town had been governed by the duke who also controlled Long Song's stronghold. It was him who had set up this arrangement. In his opinion, it would save food and also created a warning system for the monsters. The fur trade was how the local people made their living. They ventured into the misty forest to the west and hunted birds and other animals. They then sold the animals to the acquirers of Long Song's stronghold or to the residents of Willow Town. No transactions took place in the border town, and so no taxes were collected. Roland thought that, since he had come, this practice could not continue. Minerals would no longer be paid for with food. The Redwater River ran through the whole kingdom, and anyone could use it. It was essentially a highway. Even if they no longer bought food from Long Song's stronghold, there were other places they could trade with. However, This was all built upon the premise that he could stay in the border town and hold off those damn monsters. Carter worked quickly, and by the next day, he had found 2 local guards and a hunter. He reported, "These 2 men are part of the town patrol. Every year they are responsible for lighting the beacon." The hunter said he has crossed paths with the demons. He returned with the head of a demonic beast, which he said he cut off with his own 2 hands. The 3 of them bowed simultaneously. Roland nodded, gesturing for them to stand up. The first person stepped forward to speak. "Honor, respected prince, your highness." The first guard who spoke was so nervous he was unable to speak clearly. "Brian and I are the people, when it begins to snow, we will go to the North Slope Mine area to the beacon tower. There it is the first possible. It is the first place where you can see the demons. And if they are crossing over in great numbers, we'll conceal ourselves in the misty forest and light the beacon in the tower. We retreat up the road and board the boat, which we prepared beforehand. Then we leave. Since you both were together, let your partner answer." Roland covered his face to hide his disapproval. "What are the demonic beasts like? Can they be killed?" The other guard was also very nervous, but at least he did not stammer. "Your Highness, I believe so. They used to just be ordinary animals in the forest. But because of the evil miasma, they become manic and ferocious. However, they can still be killed. During every past months of the demons, Longsong's stronghold would send cavalry to cleanse the remnants of the demon monsters along the land from Longsong's stronghold to border town." "How long does the months of the demons?" Roland asked. "Generally 2 to 3 months. It depends on the sun," said Brian. "The sun?" Roland asked doubtfully. "Yes," the guard explained. "Your Highness came to this town not too long ago, so you do not know. In this border town, once the snow begins to fall, it does not stop until the sun shines again, and then the snow goes away. So the snow indicates the end of the months of the demons?" Roland recalled that at least in Graycastle, it was not like this. The next day it would stop snowing, and the sun would seem to be no different. "It is exactly like this. The longest months of the demons I have experienced was 2 years ago, which lasted for nearly 4 months, and many people starved." "Why? Shouldn't be the grain reserves in Longsong's stronghold large enough to support the town for more than 1 month?" Roland asked. Brian's face got a little angry. They had enough. But Reynolds, the municipal administrative governor who was responsible for managing such things, declared that the amount of ore and minerals mined was only enough to buy food for 3 months, and for the 4th month we had to deliver a new shipment of ore. But the months of the demons had not ended, and we couldn't leave the fortress. So that is what happened. I understand. They were fools to be alienating people. If Longsong's stronghold treated the people who lived on the frontier with this kind of cold harshness, like a spring wind, the frontiersmen would most likely want to stay and not leave. At the moment, it seemed that the group of people controlling Longsong's stronghold were not the good-natured sort. Roland beckoned the last person forward to answer, while putting the name of the municipal administrative governor in the back of his mind. The third man looked courageous and strong, standing over 6 feet tall, making Roland feel tense. Fortunately, he came forward on his knees. "You said you killed the beast?" "Yes, your highness." His voice was low and hoarse. "A demonic boar and a demonic wolf." "Species?" Roland repeated. "What do you mean?" "This is the name of the demonic beast, your highness. The fiercer the animal was before, the more difficult it is to deal with variation after. The transformation emphasizes the advantages of the animal. The demonic boar's back fur becomes extremely tough. Even within 50 meters, it is difficult to hurt it with a crossbow. The demonic wolf becomes more cunning and it runs faster. To kill it, you need to set up traps in advance. Stronger animals become even stronger, and faster animals become even faster." Roland nodded as he heard this. "But they are still animals." "Yes, they are, but they aren't the most terrible kind of enemy," the hunter said. He swallowed his saliva before he could speak further. "The worst ones are the demonic hybrids. They are the devil incarnate. Only hell is able to create such a horrible monster. I have seen a demonic hybrid. It had not only strong limbs of beast, but on its back there was a pair of huge wings, allowing it to fly short distances. And it always knew where I was. No matter how much I tried to hide, It could always detect me. It was not hunting its prey, Your Highness, but it was just teasing it. The hunter lifted his clothing, revealing a large scar extending from his abdomen to his chest. He said, "Before I lost consciousness, I fell into the Redwater River. I was lucky to survive. Such a monster actually exists." Roland felt that the world was becoming more and more fantastic. A strong wall could stop all ordinary kinds of demonic beasts, but if they could fly, what should he do? Demonic hybrids are very rare, right? "There are not many, Your Highness," the hunter replied. "During every months of the demons, there'll only be 2 to 3 demonic hybrids. Otherwise, Longsong's stronghold would be unable to defend itself." "Well, you are very observant," Roland noted. He ordered the man to stand up and asked, "What's your name? You don't look like you are from my Kingdom of Graycastle. Half of my lineage hails from the Majin clan, and the townspeople call me Iron Axe." Majin, the Irons End people, were said to be the descendants of Irons End Giant, who once lived in the southwest of the Barren Lands. Roland searched for any memories he had related to the Majin clan and realized that Iron Axe did not use the name his clan called him by, but instead used the name given to him by the people of Border Town. Apparently, he did not want to have a relationship with the Irons End people. As for why, since it was obvious that he was from the southwestern border of the desolate lands, Roland estimated that there was a series of sad stories involved. For the moment, those stories weren't important. Everyone was welcome in Border Town regardless of their background. Roland clapped his hands. "That's not why I asked you all to come here. Carter, give each of these men 10 silver royals, and then they may go." "Thank you very much for the reward, Your Highness," the 3 said in unison. Afterwards, the men were taken away by Carter. Carter returned once again and asked, "Your Highness, why did you ask them these questions? Do you want to stay here?" Roland didn't express any opinion, but instead asked, "What do you think?" "This matter is out of the question, Your Highness," the knight said loudly. According to the hunter, even the demonic boars would be difficult to defeat. Outside of 50 meters, a shot from a crossbow would have no effect. We would have to wait until it came within 40 meters, or even until 30 meters before taking our shot. Only our elite soldiers could accomplish this. Plus, there are too many demonic beasts, and we have no strong walls. We could only stand with the local guards to stop them. I'm afraid that the casualties would outstrip the accomplishment, and our defeat would be assured. You already saw what a witch is able to do, so why can't you think positively?" Roland sighed. "These witches are evil, but Miss Anna does not look so. As your chief knight, I use facts to look for the truth. If I could give you a city wall, do you think it would be possible to defend Border Town?" "What?" For a moment, Carter suspected that he had heard Roland incorrectly. "If I give you a wall between the North Slope Mountain and the Redwater River, could you defend Border Town?" Roland stressed every word he said. Although they would not be like the enormous walls from Graycastle and built only to stop beasts, but they should be enough. "Your Highness, do you understand what you are saying?" The knight honestly didn't know whether to be angry or to laugh. "Even your nonsense should have a limit. If you don't stop, you'll have to excuse my lack of manners. We still have 3 months, don't we?" I looked at Border Town's records, and the first snow usually falls then. Even if we had 3 years, it would not be enough. Building a wall would require many workers. To set the foundation, they must compress the earth, and every 1 or 2 feet has to be reinforced. Otherwise, there is a high risk of collapse. This would only be the most simple of earthen walls. Carter shook his head repeatedly. Brick and stone walls are even more difficult to build, and it would need hundreds of stonemasons who would first have to cut the stones or bake the clay into bricks. Afterwards, they would need to build it block by block. "Your Highness, all walls are built this way, without exception. A city being built in a day and a night is only the stuff of legends." Roland indicated he had heard enough. "I see. You don't need to be so upset. If there is no reliable wall in place when the time comes, I'll evacuate with you to Longsong's stronghold. I'm not prepared to die in this place." The knight knelt, swearing, "I'll protect you." Afterwards, in the beautiful castle gardens, Roland nipped at his bitter ale. Looking at Anna, who was intently eating cream cakes, his mood recovered substantially. He had decided to stop the demonic beasts at Border Town by joining the elite soldiers with the town guards. He would also increase the amount of available farmland by expanding the area the guards patrolled. If he wanted to build a wall connecting the North Slope Mountain and the Redwater River within 3 months, he would have to use technology from modern times. It was not that Roland had just suddenly thought of this. Previously, he had checked the edges of Border Town, although he didn't go personally. In his mind, he had a clear picture. The Northern Slope Mountain and the Redwater River were only separated by 600 meters at their closest point. It was a natural bottleneck. And due to the year-round, the area was surrounded by rock gravel mined from the cave. These gravel cast-offs were ash gray, containing plenty of calcium carbonate, which could be used as limestone after it was ground. With the limestone, he had his solution. It would be the same as cement. Being able to build with a water-hardening material, with raw materials which were easy to obtain and simple to prepare, it would change the history of mankind. It would stand as one of humanity's greatest achievements, among the most efficient tools for tilling fields. Roland estimated the time he would need. Even if he could implement new technology, even with cement, he wasn't sure if it was possible. The amount of cement they needed was too much, and he wasn't sure if they could calcine so much cement powder in 3 months. The strength of the concrete would be subpar, and they would need to reinforce it with steel. Thus, the odds for successfully building a concrete city were not great. They had to maximize the usage of existing materials in order to save cement, so building a fieldstone wall seemed to be the most appropriate choice. The so-called fieldstone was a stone which had not undergone any grinding. It was just a natural byproduct of mining. This stone, because of the irregular edges and corners, had no direct uses in building, but instead it first needed to be processed by the stonemason into usable bricks. However, building a fieldstone wall and using cement as binder was possible. Regardless of how oddly shaped the stone was, it could still be used, and the gaps between the stones was filled in by the cement. This process saved cement and used leftover materials. With this, the course was set, but as for the actual implementation, Roland was afraid he would have to do that by himself. Regardless of whether it was the calcined cement or fieldstone wall, both of these were new ideas. Except him, no one had ever seen these things, and no one knew how to make them. He was afraid he would be very busy for the next 3 months. "You look here?" The sound of Anna's clear voice came from behind him. As Roland turned, he saw a small cluster of flames in her palm, burning quietly. There was no wind, but the tip of the flames was rising up and down, as if it was nodding to her. She shook her finger, and the fire slowly moved towards the tip of her finger. Finally, it stood at the very tip of her index finger. "You did it." It was an incredible scene. Roland felt sincere admiration for what he had just witnessed. This was not a magical illusion, nor a chemical trick, but a real supernatural power. However, this was not the thing Roland was attracted to. Many times more dazzling than the flame was Anna's expression. While she was intently staring at her fingertips, her lake-water limpid eyes were reflecting the vibrant flame, as if an elf was sealed within a sapphire in her eyes. The traces left from being tortured in prison had already faded, and though she rarely smiled, her face was no longer lifeless. On the tip of her nose was a speck of sweat, and the rosy color on her white checks emitted vitality. Anyone who looked at her would be put into a cheerful mood. "What happened to you?" "Ah, nothing." Roland noticed he had looked at her for too long, and he removed his gaze and coughed. "Well then, try using it to melt the iron." In the past few days, except for eating and sleeping, Anna had continuously practiced. In front of the hard-working enthusiast, Roland could only endlessly blush in shame. Even when he studied for the college entrance examination, he did not work so hard. Apparently, she'll not need long until she completely grasps this power, Roland thought. Once she does, my ideas for new projects can be put on the agenda. The weather had been bad all week, and the sky was always gray. Carl Van Bate's mood was just like the weather, gloomy to the extreme. As he walked down the wet stone street, people greeted him from time to time. Carl ran a school in this town. Unlike the Kingdom of Graycastle, where only the children of noble could go to school, here he taught are the children of ordinary people. Therefore, he had a very high reputation in Border Town. "Hey, Mr. Van Bate, good morning." "Sir, is my son doing all right? When are you free, Carl? Let's go fishing together." Usually, Carl would always smile and respond to them, but today he just nodded, never saying a word. He had just witnessed Anna's hanging, so in his eyes there was a crack in the once perfect world, or this crack had begun to form since his departing from Graycastle, but he deliberately turned a blind eye. He used his busy work to numb himself, and to a certain extent, he even used the innocent smile of the students to mend this crack. Until Anna died, he thought, the world had not changed. But after the hanging, the crack not only did not disappear but expanded. His memories of Anna stopped at half a year ago. She didn't stand out of her class of more than 30 students with her normal appearance and few words. But there was something about her that impressed Carl deeply. It was her passion for knowledge. No matter what he taught, whether it was characters or history, she could always remember it on her first try. Even if it was the boring history and evolution of the religion, she could read about it all day. He had also seen the young lady help to take care of her neighbors, sheep sitting down in the sun. Anna would carefully brush the sheep's hair, like someone would with a baby. He still remembered her sweet smile very clearly, and no matter how, he could not think of her as a sinister and evil person. Then, after the fire on Anna Street and her mother unfortunately passed away, Anna never came back to school. He never saw her again until a week ago, when she was proved to be a witch and hanged in the town square. Tempted by the devil? An unclean person? Evil? All lies. He began to doubt the Holy Church and the knowledge they imparted for the first time in his life. He didn't know if Anna had been a witch or not, but she was never evil. If a teenage girl, ignorant of the world and full of curiosity, could be called evil, and then the administrative officials of the Kingdom of Graycastle were from hell and possessed by the devil too. In order to save several hundred gold royals, they deliberately switched out the stone material used to build a theater, leading to its collapse and the death of more than 30 stonemasons. But were they hanged? Not even one. The judge finally ruled that the leader of the stonemasons was unsuitable for his job, and he was punished into exile, while the Mason Guild was forced to disband. Carl, who knew the true story, fled the Kingdom of Graycastle, followed the road to the west, and eventually arrived in Border Town. He managed to establish a school with a lot of students, got to know his new neighbors, and find new friends, but the Graycastle officer's crime was always engraved in his mind. Now, he felt the world was mocking him once again. Could the gods in heaven really recognize what was evil? The last straw for Carl was Nana. Nana and Anna were so different that one could even say they were the complete opposite. After class, you could always see her playing with birds or rolling around in the grass. If you asked what she was doing, she would giggle for a while before answering that she was looking at a fight between a grasshopper and ants. Nana was always smiling. It seemed to be in her nature. She was completely oblivious of the world's sorrows, and at least at school, she could continue smiling without a care. Carl was even curious if she had ever cried since she was born. 2 days ago, Nana suddenly came to him with tears in her eyes and asked, "Teacher, will I be hanged like Anna?" This told him that his student, Nana Pine, had become a witch. "Ah, isn't that Mr. Van Bate? Come over here and help us read what it says." Carl felt someone pull his sleeve and looked up to find that he had arrived at the town square. Many people stood around the bulletin board, and when they heard Van Bate's name, they all made a path for him. "You came just in time, sir. Please help us read it. Yeah, Meg was supposed to read this to us, but he got a stomachache and had to go to the toilet, but he still isn't back yet." Usually, he would have nodded with a smile and explained in detail the contents of the bulletin board to everybody who listened. However, Carl found this impossible. The smiles and enthusiasm of these people were earnest, but this made it even more difficult to bear than if they were all pretending. The notice about Anna's hanging had also been placed here, and everyone had also discussed it this cheerily. In a sense, you were all her murderer, he thought, and your ignorance and fear had killed her. Carl suppressed his emotions, took a deep breath, and walked in front of the announcement list. "The prince calls for hands to help with the construction of new buildings for Border Town, and a variety of different kinds of jobs are available," he said. "But I'm also one of her killers, so why do I deserve to blame them? Wasn't I the one who taught them that witches were evil?" Carl had a bitter taste in his mouth. "Look at what I've taught these children. I followed every word of the church's doctrine. And I thought I was teaching them well. Damn it. Stone grinder male, 20 years to 40 years old, strong and healthy. Salary is 25 bronze royals per day. Mud craftsman, no gender limitations, over 18 years old, must have experience in masonry. Salary is 45 bronze royals per day. Handyman male, over 18 years old, salary is 12 bronze royals per day. No, he had to do something. If Anna's death was irreversible, at least he couldn't let Nana die. Carl heard his inner voice shout. When the Mason Guild collapsed, you didn't do anything. When Anna was hanged, you didn't do anything. Are you also not going to do anything and watch this lovely child being dragged up to the gallows? But what could he do? Could he escape with Nana out of Border Town? He had his own family, a family who traveled with him from Graycastle. Would he make them leave again just when their lives were getting better? Would Nana herself, who was born into a rich family, be able to leave her comfortable life? Stonemason, no gender limitations, no age limitations, long-term position for anyone who has participated in construction for the government. Salary is 1 gold royal per month. Additional term. People with rich experience and excellent performance may be granted an official position. After hearing the notice, the people became even noisier. 1 gold royal per month is even better than the salary for the stronghold cavalry. But can you do it? If you can't even build a mud pile, can you build a fortress? Don't just stare at it. Even the first few positions aren't bad. If you get paid every day, you'll earn the same amount as a hunter. Indeed, hunting is a life-threatening job, and the Misty Forest is a really dangerous place. Carl Van Bate did not pay attention to this chatter and only concentrated on the seal and signature at the foot of the notice. It was the autograph of Roland Wimbledon, the 4th prince. Did the prince not know that the months of the demons were already coming? Whatever he wanted to build, it was not a good time to start now. It seemed His Highness knew nothing about constructions, so if he could become a stonemason and catch his attention, Carl had suddenly an idea. Perhaps through this recruitment, he could meet the prince himself, Border Town's highest ruler. Carl gulped in fear. Could he convince the prince that witches were not evil? There were rumors of His Highness' unique ideas, so he should be different from ordinary people, and he also hated the church deeply. Maybe I can do it, he thought. Although Anna's hanging was ordered by Prince Roland, everyone could tell that he was not willing to do it. The prince himself was still in his early 20s, which should make it easier to understand that these young girls were incapable of being evil. Of course, there was a possibility that Carl would be branded as a witch helper and have to go to the gallows with the witches. The church's law stipulated that anyone who protected a witch or begged for leniency should be regarded as the devil's minion. He could only hope that the prince's hate for the church also extended to its laws. Carl prayed in his heart. Even though he did not know which god to pray to, he closed his eyes and prayed for a blessing. For the sake of the dead Anna, for the sake of Nana, who was still alive, and for the sake of his own heart to stop breaking, he decided to take the risk. The air is getting colder, Garcia Wimbledon lamented, combing her hair with her fingers that blew in the wind as she gazed at the ocean beyond the shoreline. It's because winter comes soon, the handsome man behind her replied, and although we live in the south, we are not in southernmost land. Only the people of Sand Nation are ignorant of the meaning of winter. The ocean current will stop all movements of our fleets in winter. This is our last chance to sail out. The young woman retorted. Ryan, how long has the Black Sail Fleet been away? 2 months and 4 days. The man replied without hesitation. If there are no hiccups, they'll arrive at the port of Clearwater in 3 days. Garcia laughed. I do hope they bring enough surprises. Ryan Coben looked at the famous woman in front of him, and feelings welled up in his heart. Her long gray hair reflected a faint silver glow in the autumn sun, and her eyes were narrow and light green. When she stared at someone, her eyes would give off a kind of unspeakable sense of oppression. Her long stays at the beach had turned her skin rougher and less fair than that of the other women, but Ryan did not mind. In his eyes, Garcia's temperament made up for any lack of beauty. Unlike her close relatives at Graycastle, Garcia Wimbledon is the true genius. She had the wisdom and pride of the noble, but she was not dulled by the constant routine. In fact, She showed aspects that were closer to that of the common people. She was full of expectations and adventurous. Of course, no common people could have such power and vision as hers. Even the Duke and the princes seemed short-sighted in front of her. With all the income from the port of Clearwater trade being poured into the construction of the fleet, there was not even a copper left in the vault. This characteristic was far beyond those misers. There is no meaning to put gold royals in the coffer. It's like a stone when it's not in use, and only when you spend it can it reflect its value. To spend the money doesn't mean you lose it, but rather, you create a return value that's even greater. Ryan's memory of what she had said to him echoed deep in his psyche, and this was a sobering concept that formed in contrast to the usual perceived stereotype. Compared to that of the noble families who spent their time accumulating and growing wealth, Ryan believed that hers was the demeanor of a ruler. So he went under the command of Garcia without hesitation and followed her to the port of Clearwater. But after arriving here, Ryan learned that the princess was so much more outstanding than that. She not only had ideas but also was full of actions. She created the plan of Black Sail Fleet and executed it in a well-ordered way. As early as 5 years ago, Garcia's forces had penetrated the port of Clearwater, preparing for the formation of the Black Sail Fleet, with no royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince announced by Wimbledon III. In other words, she had long been ahead in the race of all other heirs. "Let's go inside. The wind grows stronger," said Garcia. Her palace was located on the Salmon Harbor at the southernmost tip of the port of Clearwater. The tower-like building looked like a watchtower on the coast. It possessed a circular terrace at the top, allowing a bird's-eye view of the harbor and all ships that entered and exited it. 5 years had passed since the beginning of the operation, and the port of Clearwater trade had begun to take shape. A 3-masted ship would appear at the harbor every 6 months, and a foundation of trust had been laid down. Taking advantage of Princess Garcia's good mood, Ryan asked the question that had been plaguing his mind for months. "Your Highness, there's something I don't understand." Ryan closed the door, cutting them off from the whistling wind. "Go ahead." She smiled and nodded. "How is it that you were able to predict all of this, even before the king had announced the royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince?" He had guessed that the king had alerted her in advance, but it was impossible to know for certain. It was known that the king favored the second prince, and that this competition was set up in his favor. After all, he was given a clear win when he was assigned Valencia for his fiefdom. Was she able to guess this all on her own, so that she could set out the framework as early as 5 years ago? Heavens, she was only 20 years old. I could predict it? She shot him a strange look. "Do you take me for a witch? I have no such powers. But I had no idea that my father would take the royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince as a way to give everything to his precious second son. In all truth, is there any relationship between what I'm doing and that royal decree? No relationship?" A thought occurred to Ryan, and he could not help but gawk. Seeing Ryan Coben's strange expression, Garcia laughed. "Is it that I must wait for my father's permission, and only then I can compete for what is throne? Will it not always be the case that he who governs best will become the ruler of the Kingdom of Graycastle? I thought you understood the plan behind the Black Sail Fleet. So she has not created the fleet purely to increase her property," Ryan murmured. After the trade was completed, the fleet would put up black sails somewhere far away from the port and rob the merchant ships of other cities or countries. Similarly, the princess would encourage her subjects to sail into the sea and participate in the Black Sail Fleet plot. She gave her word that the port of Clearwater would never tax any profit gained in this manner, and that it would remain the property of the captain of the ship. This move had brought the princess great wealth, so this time she had simply ordered the Black Sail Fleet to move towards the south. They would plunder any ship throughout the endless cape, as well as those people of Sand Nation. Yet these movements were not solely for the sake of money. Garcia did not use the profits from the fleet to build a city or expand trade by roadway. Rather, she poured the money back into her ships, expanding the size of the fleet. Over the past few years, she had won over a large number of people, experienced sailors, aggressive warriors, and popular figures. If she lost governance of the area, those who committed the crimes of theft and plundering would be sent to the gallows. The person who governs the best city will win the throne of Graycastle? No. Ryan now knew it was Garcia Wimbledon that would ascend the throne, because she possessed a large number of ships and soldiers and could move along the San Juan River to pose a threat to Valencia. Did you know that you'd be assigned to the port of Clearwater? Believe it or not, I didn't expect that. It was a move to increase the trade of this city. Garcia shrugged. It was also payback to the church who'd tried to fool me. This had something to do with the church? When Garcia did not continue, Ryan dared not ask. If there was one thing that he was sure of, it was that even if she did not come to the port of Clearwater, she would take over the place and continue with her plan. Let's move on. She took a sip of her black tea. My little plan seems to have failed. Ah, yes. Ryan quickly recovered and replied, and the only news we have received from Border Town was that the plan had failed. We have received no more information since then. Our spies must have been killed by my brothers. It's unsurprising. These people were just pawns that we placed in order to win some time, and had no weight on the actual situation. Nonetheless, she changed the topic of the conversation. It's normal that other plans have failed, but I didn't expect the fourth prince to remain safe. To tell you the truth, I'm a bit disappointed. Kingfisher reported in her letter that the pills were consumed, but a failure is a failure, and I don't need an explanation. Garcia interrupted. The months of demons are around the corner. Our fourth prince will go to Longsong's stronghold for refuge. When demonic beasts invade Border Town, Stronghold will be in chaos for a while. Write to her and tell her to take this chance. Will the goddess of luck continue to stay on my brother's side? Yes, your highness. You may take your leave. Garcia waved, but as Ryan was about to leave, the princess stopped him. Oh, yes, if I remember correctly, the pills were bought from the alchemist Enbies? Ryan nodded his head. What did he say? It was colorless and tasteless, just like water. It caused death and had no cure. It was his latest invention. Garcia yawned. Hang him. Roland stood by the kiln, waiting for the first batch of cement. The brick structure was designed for cement production, about 15 meters long and 4 meters wide. It had a front and a back door. The front door was designed wide enough to allow the transport of materials and people coming in and out of the room. The back door, on the other hand, was only large enough for one person and functioned as Anna's secret entrance. To this end, he also built a wall surrounding half of the kiln and stationed guards at the entrance and exit. They were all Carter's men, and he had no doubt about their loyalty. The cement production process was easy to explain. First, limestone was crushed into powder, and then mixed with clay or iron powder. It would result in a paste whether they used the wet or dry method. After combining it with gypsum, the cement would be ready for use. Raw materials were readily available, and no iron powder was included for it was difficult to produce. The key was in the calcination temperature. Roland could not remember the specific temperature required to melt the cement. Thanks to the fact that he did not have the necessary tools like an infrared thermometer or a thermocoupling temperature gun needed to measure the said temperature, the process was made incredibly difficult. He only knew that the melting point of cement was similar to that of iron, and that the calcination process was also a tricky factor when it came to making cement. For such an era of undeveloped technology, it was a huge problem to simply maintain the temperature of the blast furnace. The common open furnace would result in great heat loss, and it was difficult to keep it burning above 1,200 degrees Celsius. As for the reverberation furnace, it required an inner capable of sustaining higher temperatures, but he did not know how to create the refractory bricks. The traditional blast furnace used for iron was even worse. The temperature may suffice, with only a narrow furnace cavity available to calcite the cement, but they could not produce enough cement before the end of months of demons. With this in mind, Roland designed a kiln that needed no heating and relied on Anna instead. Broken particles of limestone and clay were mixed with water to form a paste, which was spread evenly throughout the firing room. Then the knights locked the door and cleared out the laborers. Anna then entered through the back door and heated the ground beneath the paste until the iron bar placed inside the room also melted. Roland was becoming restless. This was his first step in guarding Border Town. If he could not produce any cement, his plan of building a city wall in 3 months would just be empty words. Without a wall to protect the town, He worried that no one would be willing to stay in this godforsaken place. Whether in history or fictional literature, a stable base was necessary for agriculture. "Your Highness, you're saying that this material can hold stones together?" asked Carter Lannis, who stood near Prince Roland. Even though the prince had said this was the result of the latest research by the alchemical workshop in Kingdom of Graycastle, he was nonetheless skeptical. After all, that group of people was never famous for being useful. "Who knows? That's what they said," Roland replied. "In this world, alchemy and astrology were known as the sage arts and were very popular in the mainland. The royal family would generally keep their own alchemists and astrologers to predict and improve their fate. For ordinary folks, however, such knowledge was beyond their comprehension and thus had little enthusiasm for them. Keeping this in mind, it was only natural for Roland to claim that the cement was a product of the alchemical workshop. He did not care about whether the chief knight believed it or not. The flame in the window eventually died down. The firing of the cement seemed to be complete. Roland stood up at once, sending Carter away to the yard. He waited alone in front of the brick house. The iron door creaked as it opened, and Anna stepped out naked. Roland draped a robe over her at once and handed her a glass of water. "How was it?" The witch's face was painted a dusty gray. Even though wet cement would not produce much dust, it would still appear when the cement was burning. Since she could not wear a mask, it was uncomfortable for her to stay inside for tens of minutes. She coughed twice and nodded. "The mud has turned gray." Roland was too impatient to wait for the temperature to be lowered. Wetting a towel, he wrapped it around his head and grabbed a shovel. He then went in through the back door. Hot air instantly engulfed him, and he found it difficult to breathe. The skin on his hands was burnt raw. Fortunately, shoveling the ashes took only a short moment. Otherwise, he might really experience thermal shock had he stayed any longer. "Is this what you want?" Anna asked, staring at the material. She had already put on her witch's robes. "Looks like it." Roland flattened the powder and tested the temperature with his fingers. "I wouldn't know for sure until we use it. What's the use of this thing?" "To build houses and bridges and to repair roads. There are too many uses for this thing. If it succeeds, people won't have to worry about the cold or the rain and snow damaging their houses." Using his other hand, he patted the girl on the head. "It's all thanks to you." Anna lowered her head. He wasn't sure if it was just an illusion, but the girl's breathing seemed to have sped up a notch. In theory, the fire material should be grinded with gypsum as to adjust its hardening time. But there was no need to think about so much right now. After a short break, Roland picked up 2 shovels and called for Carter, who was standing outside the courtyard. Roland told him to mix the gray ash proportionally with the river sand in a ratio of 3:1 to prepare cement mortar. The chief knight did not mind doing menial work. In his opinion, it was much better than fighting or chasing after the noble ladies for his highness in the Kingdom of Graycastle. As there was no iron powder in the raw mixture, the resulting paste looked off-white. Roland piled the paste on a brick and placed another brick on top of it. It would usually take around 4 hours for the cement to become solid. As this was merely a trial run, he decided that it would be best to wait until tomorrow to test the mixture. The next morning, Roland hurried to the kiln room, bringing Carter and Anna with him. When he opened the door, he noticed that the cement appeared solid and the bricks seemed to have stuck together. The surface of the material seemed rugged and part of it was covered in white frost. Roland squatted down. It was natural for the alkalization process to result in some white frost. He pressed onto the hardened cement and his heart leaped. The cement was rock solid, completely different from the texture of the solid clay. Even when he pushed into the cement firmly, there was no mark on its surface. After getting the signal from Prince Roland, Carter first tried to lift the bricks. He then attempted to kick the bricks until they gave way. The cement dislodged from the ground, yet the bricks remained stuck firmly together. He ended up using the hilt of his sword to knock them apart, but he succeeded in only knocking off a small corner of the bricks. So this is the effect of the so-called cement? The purpose of the material dawned on Carter. It's simply incredible. It flowed like wax from a melting candle yesterday, but in just one night it had become as strong as a rock. With this, we can build the wall as fast as we want. As long as we have enough bricks, We could even build a wall around border town in less than 5 years. What's the use of that? Roland asked. A tall wall would not be able to stop enemies from within. I'd rather turn the old wooden huts in border town into solid cement houses, so my subjects would no longer have to worry about losing their homes in natural disasters. The chief knight was stunned. He did not expect Prince Roland, who was known for his many aristocratic vices, would suggest such a thing. You'll understand it in the future. Roland reaffirmed the path he was taking. For many people who traveled through time, technology was the gate leading to productivity. But here, the witches were their path to the future. The production of cement went into a rapid development. In order for Anna to have ample amount of rest, the kiln room only operated once every 2 to 3 days. Hoping to obtain more raw materials, Roland once again issued a recruitment notice, thus doubling the population of the workers. However, Roland himself knew that he could not always depend on Anna to do these. Working in a dusty environment for an extensive amount of time would cause people to suffer from silicosis. Plus, once the production scale was expanded, Anna alone would be much too insufficient for the demand. Witches should not be utilized as consumables, but instead as the engine to stimulate the development of civilization. Although Roland recognized the fact very well, as of this moment, he could only spend all his efforts in constructing the city wall. After all, nothing could be done if the demonic beast could not be stopped. A project was launched to dig the foundation for laying the city wall that connected the North Slope Mountain and Redwater River. As chief manager of this project, and in accordance with the routine of the world Roland previously lived in, he dug out the first shovel of dirt amidst a mass of flabbergasted faces and audience. Roland thought that after solving the cement problem, building a city wall would be effortless. However, when he actually began to do the work, he discovered that he was utterly ignorant in engineering. How deep and wide should the foundation be dug? How to solve the unevenness of the ground? How to ensure a 600-meter-long wall was kept in a straight line after construction? Back then, when the city government was constructing the road, Roland saw a group of young fellas measuring the road with tools and rulers, something called theodolites and leveling instrument. But there was hardly anything like those to be found over here. As a mechanical blueprinter, although Roland and the next-door civil engineer were known as the ultimate geeks, however, their expertise was much too different. Not only that, none of the recruited bricklayers had ever participated in the construction of a big engineering project. Their capabilities were not even comparable to Roland's. Therefore, progress was extremely slow after the city wall project started. It took a whole week to even dig an incomplete, shallow trench. Once the engineering project lost control, the final product would be unimaginable. For instance, this shallow trench that they dug with much difficulty looked more like a drainage ditch instead of the foundation for the city wall. Although Roland gestured an estimated width before they started, the width became increasingly narrow as they continued to dig. It even appeared to be a twisted snake if someone looked at it from a distance. Nevertheless, Roland was reluctant to terminate the project. Based on the mindset that a gradual progress was better than no progress at all, as long as the kiln room was not in its operating hours, Roland would spend all day at the foot of North Slope Mountain. He would adjust the direction of the pit with his naked eye and slowly push the project forward. At the same time, he also doubled the rewards of the stone craftsmen. Fortunately, such an awkward period did not last too long. While Roland was in the firing room to direct the firing of the 6th batch of cement, Assistant Minister Barov reported that a stonemason had responded to the recruitment notice. The stonemason claimed that he joined the Mason Guild in the Kingdom of Graycastle for a while and was now waiting outside the hall. Roland thought about it for a moment and was exhilarated. In his memory, the Mason Guild in the Kingdom of Graycastle was a prominent and pioneering team that even Prince Roland had heard of. Even though the team was ordered to be dismissed due to a construction accident, but how could there be no accidents when you work in the construction industry? Bring him in? Roland made a pretense of being composed and nodded. He wanted to tell Anna to leave, but changed his mind after a while. Border Town had a population of 2,000 residents, and hardly any residents had ever seen the faces of witches. Besides, Anna looked totally different from the girl who previously wanted to commit suicide. Plus, with the peculiar clothing that Anna was wearing, it was unlikely that anyone would recognize her. Karl van Bate was upset when the knight brought him into the courtyard. He wanted to first inform His Highness that it was unsuitable to undertake such a big project in this season, and then gradually obtain the trust from His Highness and ultimately change his perspective towards witches. However, according to the rumor, His Highness had always been quite capricious. What if his advice received adverse effect from His Highness? His heart was shaking when he bowed and saluted to His Highness. While lifting up his head, he stood aghast at the sight. The girl stood next to His Highness looked so familiar. He even had this delusion that he might be dreaming. Karl rubbed his eyes, stared again, and cried out uncontrollably, "Anna! Jesus Christ! What a coincidence! He just randomly hired a craftsman, and he hired a neighbor of the witch?" Apparently, the craftsman seemed very familiar with Anna. Otherwise, he would not be able to recognize her in an instant. Roland turned his head and looked at Carter Lannis, who immediately understood Roland's thoughts. Carter quickly locked the door, blocking the only exit. "Professor, Carl." Anna's reaction puzzled Roland for a bit. "What, Professor? It's you indeed, Anna. Carl felt the warmth in his eye socket, and something started to spill down. He fell on the ground hopelessly and repeated endlessly, "Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm so glad. What a blessing." After a while, Karl van Bate finally was able to appease his emotions. He slowly stood up and again bowed to Roland. "I'm sincerely apologetic, Your Highness. I have forgotten my manners. What's the matter? Aren't you a stonemason?" "I used to be," Karl swiftly replied after he released his concerns. His Highness did not execute Anna. It was a surrogate that was hanged on the execution ground. Realizing this fact, he already knew what his next move would be, although he was fuzzy about why His Highness would rescue a witch. Nevertheless, even if His Highness intended to take Anna as his lover, that would still be much better than sending her to the gallows. At least it proved that the prince did not fear the rumor that witches were the incarnation of the demon. He confided his experience of being exiled from Kingdom of Graycastle to Border Town, including incidents such as establishing a local school and finding out that Nana Pine also turned into a witch. At the end, he beseeched His Highness to also hide Nana in the castle, in order to protect Nana from any persecution in case the residents found out her true identity. Anna, who was standing aside, did not speak a word, although she seemed to desperately want to plead for Nana. A new witch. What great news! Although the name Pine sounds familiar, Roland thought and called the assistant minister for further inquiry, and he found out that Pine was the last name of a middle-class noble in Border Town. "You could bring her to see me. If she is truly a witch, I vouch that she'll be safe from any sort of harm," Roland promised. "But I can't take her away from the Pines, especially when she isn't threatened by her family. Besides, the reason that I saved Anna is far different from what you thought." He pondered for a bit and decided to tell the truth. "I need her help. Compared to such incredulous tales of demons and evil power, I'm more inclined to believe that the power of witches has nothing to do with good or evil. It can instead be controlled. So, regardless of Anna, Nana, or any other witches, as long as they did not commit any real crime, I'd not consider them as sinful." Next, let us talk about some serious issues. Have you ever participated in the construction of the city wall of Kingdom of Graycastle? The prince brought the subject back to the construction project. "Yes." Karl nodded. Even though Prince Roland did not keep Nana as how Karl predicted, saying that His Highness needed the help of witches was also perplexing. However, it was good enough that His Highness promised to protect Nana. "Very well. I'm planning to build a city wall over the Redwater River and at the foot of North Slope Mountain to block the invasion of demonic beasts. From now on, you're responsible for this project. Your Highness, how tall and how wide do you plan to build this city wall?" Karl asked. "At least 5 meters high, 2 meters wide, and allowing 4 people to march forward side by side." Roland subtly acknowledged that Karl was indeed a professional, first asking about the technical data and then confirming the construction plan. Then a trench needs to be dug that's about 1 man's height in order to stabilize the upper portion of the city wall. Also, if the top of the wall is about 2 meters wide and the wall is about 5 meters tall, The width of the lower portion of the wall at least needs to be doubled, Carl promptly replied. The process of trenching will need huge manpower. Your Highness, if you could provide me with 150 people, I could probably finish the trench before the months of demons. A gutterway could not possibly block the demonic beasts, Roland said noncommittally. That's why it'll take 3 years if the upper portion of the city wall is massoned with stones. If it's solely for the purpose of blocking the demonic beasts, then there's no need to build the wall to such a great height. About 4 meters high would be enough. We can also shrink the width by 1/3 and the bottom to about 2 meters. Digging trenches and masonry will proceed simultaneously. Increase the number of workers by 200. That way I can complete it before next year's months of demons. Carl paused and then continued. Pardon me in my frankness, Your Highness. Now it's not a good time to undertake the construction. If we don't mason the wall in a timely manner, even if the trench is dug, but after soaking by the rain and snow through the entire winter, it'll lose its original functions. That way, it'll cost more time and manpower to clean and soften the trench, causing the trench to be dug even deeper. Assuming we adopt your plan and build the city wall 4 meters high and 2 meters wide, how long will it take to complete the trench? It'll most likely take 1.5 months, Carl answered. Then let's take this plan. Digging the trench and masonry will proceed simultaneously so that the construction is completed before the months of demons. Roland waved his hand and interrupted Carl. I know your concerns. Look at this first, a new product from the alchemical workshop of Graycastle. He, of course, did not have time to once again stick the bricks together to show the stonemason. He simply presented the 2 bricks that he stuck together beforehand. Fortunately, no one dared to question the prince. When Carl heard that an alchemic adhesive called cement was able to solidify within 1 night and produce massive adhesive force, he looked astonished. Carl, as someone who devoted half of his life to the Mason Guild, naturally recognized how groundbreaking this invention was. Besides adhering stones, most importantly, it would be able to transform into any shape. Roland judged Carl's expression with satisfaction and pursued again. What do you think? Would 3 months be enough? Carl Van Bate replied with a trembling voice. If what you said is true, no, I mean if the alchemical workshop described this thing truthfully, I'm willing to give it a try. Very well. I'll have someone write a detailed document for you regarding the usage of cement. You can speak to my assistant minister for any other needs. Roland smiled. Mr. Carl, now you're a member of the administrative office. Roland saw Nana in the next afternoon. The young girl stared at Anna with some degree of bewilderment. She clutched her clothes and was finally able to compose a sentence. Have I already died? When Roland first met Nana, he had to admit that the power of witches not only bestowed them incredible abilities, but also, in some degrees, changed their countenance and aura. Nana was a totally different type compared to Anna, but they all had their unique charm. Such feelings had nothing to do with age or lifestyles. Even when Anna was waiting for the coming death in prison, the brilliance that was illuminating from her was not affected at all. Searching through all his memory, Roland did not even encounter this sort of feelings, whether it was the hooker on the street side of Kingdom of Graycastle or the well-mannered noble mistress. If Roland had to describe it, when he placed witches with those ordinary girls on the same page, it was as if colorful figures appeared on black and white photos. Carl, who escorted Nana, gracefully excused himself. Now there were only Roland, Anna, and Nana left in the palace garden. You're alive, and Anna is here, safe and sound. Roland tried to suppress his smiles. I'm Prince Roland Wimbledon, and I'm Nana Pine. The young girl was back to her usual lively self after she heard that she did not die. Nana rushed straight to Anna, rambling on and on with her, and completely neglected the presence of Roland, the Prince of Graycastle. Certainly, Roland would not care to haggle over the impudence of a 14-year-old young girl. He poured himself a glass of ale and started to appreciate the daily life of the 2 witches. Anna was apparently not accustomed to the overwhelming friendliness from Nana. She occasionally responded while Nana continued her speech. After all, Anna was merely 17 years old, but she already appeared to be an elder sister. Roland could not help but think how outstanding Anna would become after she became fully grown up. When Nana finally slowed her speech, Roland coughed and inquired, "Miss Pine, according to your professor, you have awakened as a witch." Compared to the public, who most often referred to the word fallen when describing someone that had turned into a witch, Roland believed that awaken was a better word choice. He would not naively consider all witches as innocent and pure. Those malicious individuals who obtain power would only beget a catastrophe. This was the same as using a weapon, as it can create violence but also resist violence. The essential aspect was that it all depended on the person who was using the weapon. Perhaps the church's propaganda of the massacres done by witches was based on evidence. However, it was unfair to use that as the proof to treat all witches as guilty. Nana's expression stiffened, and she mumbled in a soft voice, "Are you going to hang me?" "No, of course not. Those individuals who were sent to the gallows were all heinous and despicable villains. You're not one of those, nor is Miss Anna. So don't concern yourself with that." Nana took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm not sure. Professor said that witches obtain the demonic power after being lured by the demon. But I have never seen any demon. When did you find out that you've become different?" "About a week ago," Nana muttered. "I saw a bird with a broken leg. I really wanted to help it. Then I felt something come out of my hands." "What came out of your hands?" Roland questioned. "What happened next?" All of a sudden, it surrounded the little bird like a mass of sticky liquid." Nana tilted her head and recalled. "Then the bird's leg was healed. Is her power the healing type?" Roland's heart missed a beat. He was very clear what this kind of power meant. In the days where there was an absence of antibiotics and a lack of advanced medical technology, people died easily from injuries and infections. Although this power might not work to promote the development of civilization, it was meaningful to every individual human. Roland immediately walked to the door and demanded the knight to bring a living hen. If he could prove the credibility of her words, perhaps he could change the situation of witches being mercilessly oppressed in Bordertown. After seeing the knight leave with his orders, Roland returned to the table. "If you can heal small animals, why would you still think that witches are evil? The teacher said that witches can do things ordinary people can't. Sometimes it does not look bad, but this is the devil's ruse in order to lure more people." The girl's voice lowered. I've never seen the devil, I swear." "Of course you haven't. That is just one of the church's lies, and your teacher was deceived as well," Roland comforted. "The church lies?" Nana exclaimed. "Why?" Roland shook his head and did not explain. Even if he tried to explain, they would still not understand. When civilization had not yet developed to a certain extent, these sort of strange things would always happen. Even without personal gain, people would automatically attribute man-made, natural disasters, or any unexplainable phenomenon to the invented culprit behind the scenes. Historically speaking, the blame always fell on the women. And in this world, if witches possessed powers of unknown origin, it was even easier to become the target of the church. The church could allow for the witches to be ordained as saints by saying they were the gifts of God, or the witches could be hunted, proclaiming they were the demon's advocates. However, once the former was chosen, monotheism would greatly lose its power because the appearance of the witches had nothing to do with the church. If churches that believe in other deities also recognize the witches as saints, and everyone was the chosen one, which church's God was the true God, the prerequisite for the coexistence of polytheism was that the gods were real and could restrict each other. Since gods did not exist and were only hearsay icons, why should the other party share the world? So any faith would claim that they believed in the true God, and the infidels would have to be eliminated. So they could only choose the latter, to spare no effort in destroying the witches. This was irrelevant to preference, it was all about gain. There was a living chicken in the castle's kitchen. It was still kicking and fluttering when the knight carried it by its wings. The next thing left Nana stunned. Roland pulled out the silver knife and stabbed the chicken once. The knight held it in place firmly, and he let Nana treat it before he tried a different method and continued. He did this repeatedly. When the chicken finally died, Roland had a better understanding of Nana's ability. She could restore the damaged parts, including splits, fractures, and bruises. But if the body part was completely missing, for example, after the chicken feet were cut off, she could not regenerate claws. But the broken claws could be connected if she used her ability to make the fracture intact. Finally, she could not reverse life and death. Once the chicken died, her treatment became useless. Throughout the whole treatment, Roland did not see the sticky water that she described. She simply put her hand on the chicken's wound, and then it was healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After several experiments, Nana did not deplete much energy. At least she did not sweat profusely like Anna. Only Nana was dissatisfied, as she felt it was too much to treat the chicken like this. So she kept staring at Roland even after the experiments. "Come on, stop staring and eat something." Roland had to resort to summon afternoon tea, so as to divert her attention. This move had worked several times on Anna, so he assumed that many girls her age could not resist the temptation of delicious dessert. And truth be told, Nana did not fare any better than the one before her. After eating the pastries, Roland sent Nana away. Anna asked in confusion, "Why didn't you make her stay?" "She's like me. We're both witches, right? She still has family members, and they have not realized she is a witch." Anna whispered, "It's just a matter of time." "Yes, sooner or later," Roland sighed. "So anyway, the later the better. Do you miss your father?" She shook her head, and her eyes were like a calm lake with no ripples. It seemed that the betrayal by her father had left her completely disappointed. But even without any relatives, she still had friends. "Nana will come often. In fact, I intend to let her come every 2 days to train her ability." Hearing this, she blinked her eyes and nodded quickly. "Do you want to go back to Carl's college with her and learn from the other kids?" Anna did not answer, but he felt he heard her thoughts. "This situation won't last too long. As long as I'm here, you'll eventually live like ordinary people and not be hunted wherever you are or sent to the gallows. This day will come, I promise," said Roland firmly. Since Carl van Bate took over the project, Prince Roland immediately became idle. He stayed in the castle garden every afternoon, practicing with Anna or Nana. Now Anna's training no longer required additional clothing. Even if each finger was in flames, she could skillfully operate them without lighting up her witch hat by accident. Nana also put on a set of witch uniform. Although she was reluctant to practice, for the sake of afternoon tea, she still poutingly did so. Watching the two witches dangling in the yard, Roland's wicked humor was greatly satisfied. Occasionally, he would go to the foot of North Slope Mountain to check on the progress of the project. After more than 2 weeks of construction, about 100 meters of the city wall had been built. In the absence of the theodolite distance measurement, Carl asked the craftsman to use a piece of wood at the same time every day, according to the shadow of the sun, to determine the distance and flatness. At a distance of every 10 wood markers, a viewing tower was set up to play a role in stabilizing the city wall. Such large-scale employment naturally caught the attention of the town's nobility. However, other than getting some information from Barov, they made no further movement, as if the situation had nothing to do with them. Roland did not mind this. These people's family businesses were in Longsong Stronghold and would certainly not stay here to help him guard Border Town. He could even imagine the gang of people ridiculing his attempts in private. Not just the nobility, but businessmen were the same. In previous years in Border Town, once animal fur traders realized nothing could be purchased, they also returned to Stronghold. They naturally vented their discontent about returning empty-handed on the ruler Roland. The news about Kingdom of Graycastle's Prince Roland Wimbledon's construction before the arrival of months of demons was deemed as simply stupid and ignorant. News of this spread along the Redwater River. At this point, no one thought he could protect the town, and in fact, most people simply did not consider this a remote possibility. After all, Prince Roland did not give the impression of being a courageous fighter. Whatever he was contemplating, he would eventually have to obediently retreat to Stronghold. And just like this, amidst discussion by the masses, Roland ushered in the first winter. The fire in the fireplace was burning brightly, chasing away the chill coming in from the door and window gaps. Atop of the fireplace hung a huge horned deer head, and under the shadows, the horns looked like huge claws. Opposite was a dark red long wooden table, filled with parchment rolls and books, mostly executive orders waiting to be signed. Roland usually came here to deal with official matters. After converting the third level of the castle into an office, he gradually started to like it here. Through the French window behind him, he could see the town extending into endless mountains. The mountain passed through the continents of the impassable mountain range, dividing Kingdom of Graycastle and wild places into east and west. And North Slope Mountain was just a branch of the impassable mountain range. At the foot, you could see the garden surrounded by the wooden fence. The wooden shed built for Anna's training had been removed, and the brick pool was made into a long table for afternoon tea. When the weather was good, he would also go downstairs for a suntan or lie on a specially tailored rocking chair to take a nap. Although the castle was not big, at least it was still considered a villa with an independent garden. In his previous life, it would have been almost impossible to own a real stone castle. He would have had to pay for tickets just to have a visit. But now, he not only owned the castle, but also the town. Your Highness, recently you've had a lot of expenses from recruiting the craftsmen and the manual laborers. If we continue such expense, we won't be able to last until next spring. Barov held a pile of parchment while reporting the recent financial situation to Roland. The original income and expenditure of Border Town was very simple. One line was, or in the precious stones trade. This line was monopolized by Longsong Stronghold, turning North Slope Mine's output into wheat or bread, with no tax in the middle, and Stronghold sent people to host the exchange of resources. As the saying goes, those nobles stationed in Border Town can be seen as regulators of the shareholders, and their fiefs are mostly in the east of Stronghold, where they are only temporary and different people are dispatched each year. In fact, the history of Border Town was less than 3 decades long. Compared to nearly 200 years of Longsong Stronghold, it was a mere newborn baby. Originally, Duke of Ryan was just going to build an outpost here as an early warning for the invasion of demonic beasts, but he did not expect to discover a wealth of mineral resources at North Slope Mountain after land reclamation. So he decided to set up the town here and named it Border Town. In a sense, it was North Slope Mine that created the town. In order to prevent theft and cover-ups, the Duke did not employ the noblemen, but instead employed local residents, refugees, and even criminals to serve as miners. The output of ore was evenly distributed according to the resources allocated by the investors. Longsong Stronghold only needed to provide the employers with a full year of grain and a small commission, which was a fixed amount regardless of the output of the mine. Border Town had more than 2,000 residents, and half of them worked for the mining area. The rest was the other industries in the town, such as blacksmith shops, pubs, textiles, and so on. The meager tax of Border Town came mainly from here, and not much was left at year's end. The previous lord did not take this barren land seriously. After Roland was sent by Kingdom of Graycastle, he simply stayed in Longsong's stronghold and did not come back. Therefore, Roland could only pay people to repair the wall with his own money. If it was the previous Prince Roland, this would have been out of the question. But for Roland, as long as he could stabilize Border Town, he would not mind investing his whole property. Anyway, in the future, or trade would no longer be bartered with food. If it used currency, then his investment would be just a small price to pay. The only problem was Longsong Stronghold was not willing to give up the monopoly and continued normal trade with Border Town. This was quite like snatching food from the tiger's jaws, but Barov's data showed inefficient manpower and transport hurdles. The annual value output of the ore was no more than 1,000 pieces of gold royals. Compared to the entire revenue of Longsong Stronghold, it was but a drop in the ocean. The only loss was that of the nobles. For the long-term development of Border Town, this line had to be recovered. Roland knew very well that even if their investment was fully recovered 10 years ago, the nobles would not easily let go. Even if this was a small piece of meat, yet this was a passive income without doing anything. He was willing to give the previous investors a certain amount of concessions and compensation, such as half-price purchase and the like. But dragging a ship of or back in exchange for just half a boat of food was not allowed to happen again. As Roland stared at the list, Barov was also watching him intently. Over these 3 months, well, to be exact, in the last month, Prince Roland underwent some unspeakable changes. Outsiders might not notice, But he was with the prince every day, and the change could not escape his eyes. At the Kingdom of Graycastle, he had already heard of Prince Roland Wimbledon's notoriety. He did what he liked, wantonly, and without caring about noble manners. In short, he did not make grave mistakes, but he made numerous errors and was far worse than his two brothers. When Barav was sent by His Majesty to come here, he was very disappointed. If not for the fact His Majesty promised to appoint him as the official treasurer after the struggles of the throne ended, he would have given up ages ago. In the first 2 months at Border Town, Prince Roland showed his usual extreme, childish behavior and offended almost all the local nobles. Fortunately, the town was very small. Even if all the administrative staff vacated, he could easily fill their posts with the dozen civilian staff he brought. And then, things started to change. When did the change begin? He thought probably after he saved the witch. Barav had considered that Roland was possessed by the demon, or maybe he was controlled by another witch. But this was a slim possibility. If demons and witches had such ability, would they look for Prince Roland? Wouldn't it make more sense to control His Majesty or the Pope? What further dispelled his suspicions was the fact that he saw the prince hold God's locket of retribution. This was the church's weapon to deal with witches. Any demon would collapse in front of the God's locket of retribution. Yet Roland held it directly. In other words, if he was not Prince Roland, but a devil that did not even fear the divine power, then would it be necessary to expose him? Saving one's life was the most important thing. The prince continued with his notorious behavior, but he left a different impression on Barav. No, Barav thought the two had clearly opposing behaviors. The biggest difference was in motive. He could feel Roland was planning something. In order to achieve his purpose, he had to use some inexplicable means. Just like how Roland tried to persuade himself to save a witch, the plan may not be mature and have loopholes, but the prince was indeed moving forward with his plan and was confident about the results. This was the most puzzling thing. The throne could be taken by any one of Roland's siblings, but definitely not the prince himself. He would have been clear about this fact. Talking about development in this small place, border town, even the gods could not do it. What crazy plan was Roland making, trying to develop a border town to be more successful than Valencia? Even convincing himself that it would work? If it was just a crazy fantasy, that would be fine, but Roland's construction of the walls proved otherwise. He really intended to be stationed here, relying on a type of alchemy product, cement, to build a wall that was impossible to complete. Barav's family had an alchemist, but he had never heard of alchemists creating such a thing. To build a wall based on what had never been seen, was this self-confidence or imagination? What else was Prince Roland concealing? He found himself starting to have a faint interest in the future. "This place is just as lousy as it used to be," said Petrov, the ambassador from the stronghold, as he stepped out of the cabin and was immediately hit by the stench of rotten wood. Sinking in the moist and dull atmosphere that discomforted him from head to feet, he sniffed and looked up to the sky where the clouds were gathering. They were a sign of heavy rain that drew near. "It's been a year since your last visit," said the assistant as he wrapped his boss in a wool coat. "There is nothing here except stones." "It's been 1.5 years, stated Petrov. "Every season the Lord Duke sends a different person here, and the last time I came here was in summer. Apart from stones, there were other kinds of things here like fine furs and—" "What?" the assistant said with a dazed look. Petrov shook his head and said no more. When he crossed the board and set foot on the moss-covered wooden dock, the planks he stepped on were creaking so loudly that it made him believe it would only be a few years before the whole dock shattered into pieces. Yes, in addition to stone and fur, it was the land of border town that could not be underestimated. But a common assistant who only dealt with papers and numbers was not open-minded enough to understand. The land between Border Town and Longsong Stronghold was untouched and squeezed into a narrow channel, caged on each side by the impassable mountain range and the Redwater River. If it was Border Town that worked as an outpost and took the duty as a defensive line, the stronghold would easily possess the untouched land and farm it constantly. And, with the natural barrier guarding it on both sides, managing it would be simple. The food harvested from the land would feed the rising population in the stronghold, and Border Town would become part of the stronghold rather than staying independent. The only disadvantage was that the operation would be expensive and would take 3 to 5 years. What a shame. When it came to investment, most nobles were no better than a poor businessman. Why is there no ore in the storage yard? Pointing toward the clearing, the assistant said, shouldn't they stack the ore before we arrive? Petrov sighed softly. We should pay our respects to His Highness. Wait, Mr. Ambassador, why not wait for their welcome party? The assistant suggested. Petrov was unsure if there would even be one, so instead he stated, let's go, the stables are just in front of us. This illustrated the difficulties with having the two lands independent. When the king sent out Prince Roland in the name of the royal decree on the selection of the crown prince, how would a loyal young man behave? Surely he would sweep everything under his wings, and as such, it was hardly possible that he would trade ores and gemstones for food and bread. He feared that gold royals would be all that the prince held dear. He would do the same under such circumstance, because no one would tolerate when all that they've reaped from the land was exchanged at such a low price. It seems that many people have forgotten that Long Song Stronghold is not merely a station run through Redwater River. Beyond it also exist many other places like Willowtown, Fallen Dragon Ridge, and Redwater City, where he could sell minerals at market price, and he could take the refugees. They were only a little further than Long Song Stronghold. And then what would Long Song Stronghold do? Bar the river and block the prince's procession? No, to do so would be treason. Even if it was a well-known fact that Prince Roland did not earn much favor from his father, the loyal name and blood could not be ignored. There were no better horses in the stable other than the old ones. They were weak and skinny with scruffy fur that left them trembling all over as they trotted slowly. The ambassador had no choice but to pay 2 gold royals as a pledge for 2 shabby horses, which carried them slowly on the flagstones along the river. Look, sir, is that a cargo boat from Willowtown? The assistant called out, causing him to turn his eyes to where his assistant was pointing. Slowly, there came a sailing boat with 1 mast and a banner bearing a green leaf and scimitar hanging over it. Its high waterline meant that the boat was full of cargo. Nodding his head and keeping a poker face, Petrov hid the very real concern that was triggered by what he had seen. He had not expected Prince Roland to act so early. If Prince Roland has begun to trade with the towns downstream of the Redwater River, then the advantage he has is shifting. He had intended to persuade his father to agree on acquiring or at 30% less than the market price. And at any rate, there are gemstones that will be crafted into many valuable luxuries. However, this issue is under a monopoly and is not for him to decide. Even the Honeysuckle family as a whole cannot make a decision unless all 6 noble families agree. But they seemed unaware of what had been changed as time had gone by and barely had any response. Or maybe the production in the mine was too low to draw their attention. It ended up that the other 5 families remained indifferent, and his own father, looking so sure of himself, rejected his advice. But all of them had made a huge mistake, since the low production of the mine, caused by the trade-off based on materials and food, could easily be transformed into a much greater amount when the exchange became normal and the ore was bought at a fair price. With this, the more border towns sold, the more money they would earn, resulting in an increase in or the following year. But with this, Petrov thought the monopoly on, or that he had hoped for, would be unlikely to realize. From the view of the empty storage yard on the dock, it seemed that the prince had no plan of trading his stones for inferior wheat, as he had already summoned other buyers. 30% off would be his last bargaining chip if he still wanted to maintain business with Bordertown. Willowtown would offer as much as half off the market price, since the long waterway between the 2 towns would add transportation costs, and they also had more than one source of minerals. The prices offered by Fallen Dragon Ridge and Redwater City would be even lower. As a result, Prince Roland may continue his business with the stronghold, especially for gemstones. But the problem was whether his father would agree on the contract that he decided to sign. What if the other families thought that the contract was a sign of surrender and handing over family interests? After all, they always treated Bordertown as a sub-area of the stronghold and a supplier for whatever they needed. They rode slowly to the gate of the castle that was standing in the southeast corner of the town, whose lord had changed since his last visit. The guard saw the ambassador's voucher and immediately went to inform the lord. Prince Roland then quickly sent for Petrov. When both of them arrived at the hall, the prince was seated and waiting. "Mr. Ambassador, please take a seat." Roland clapped his hands, and the maids brought forward a scrumptious-looking meal. It included an entire roast chicken, boar trotter stewed with mushrooms, buttered bread, and a huge portion of vegetable soup. It looked like, whether in the border or not, whatever a prince wanted, he got it. Petrov naturally could not hold back. It took 2 days from the stronghold to border town with good winds. If he traveled on a freighter with multiple masts, then it would move even slower and take 3 to 5 days. There was no kitchen on the boat, and they would usually eat their own dried meat or wheat cake. Seeing the hot churning dishes, his mouth and throat filled with saliva. But the courtesy that he had been trained since his youth helped him keep his decent manners at the table. In comparison, the prince paid little attention to his own manners, especially with using a knife and fork. Petrov noticed that he used a pair of little sticks to pick up the food and only used the knife and fork to cut the meat. The little sticks looked handier than a fork. "What do you think?" Roland suddenly asked when the dinner was about to end. "Of what?" The ambassador was lost. "These?" The prince shook the sticks in his hand and went on without waiting for Petrov's reply. "A knife and fork seem beyond most commoners' means, not to mention they are made from silver. However, a man who grabs food with his bare hands could easily take in much filth and become ill. Do you follow?" The ambassador did not know what to say, as he barely understood the question. Maybe he guessed that the filth attached to the food that we eat could make us vulnerable to sickness. But how could that be true? People have eaten with their hands for a long time, and no one has died from such a thing. There are numerous pairs of oak sticks in Misty Forest, and they are both clean and accessible. This means that the common people should use them to grab the food, instead of using their hands. Prince Roland sipped some of his drink and said, "Of course, for now, meat seems a little far from their real life, but things will change." Petrov was relieved, as this was not a hard topic for him. He routinely expressed his approval and blessing, but in his heart he disapproved. Let the common subjects eat meat? It was simply whimsical. Even in Graycastle, they are far from this point, not to mention in border town of this desolate land. Petrov tossed aside his complaints and enjoyed the feast. Under the harmonious atmosphere during the dinner, Prince Roland did not talk about the ore, so Petrov thought it was inconvenient to speak anymore. When the prince told the maid to serve the dessert, Petrov tentatively said, "Your Highness, according to the previous practice, today should be the day when the ores are delivered. However, I didn't see any on the dockyard." Roland put down the sticks in his hand and nodded. "Unfortunately, the Northern Slope mine collapsed a few days ago. My people have been trying to resume production this month. However, the gravel from the collapse has not yet been cleared up. If we go by the schedule, we can't start mining until the start of next year." A collapse? Petrov was stunned for a moment. Was it an excuse? But he soon realized that it was unnecessary for Roland to deceive him. Otherwise, it would be clear if he went to Northern Slope, and it would show on his face if the prince told such an obvious lie. Then, what about the ore from the past 2 months? Not many are left. According to the normal practice, there aren't enough to support the livelihood of my subjects. Roland emphasized the words, "according to the normal practice." He continued, "Mr. Ambassador, you remember the months of demons 2 years ago, don't you?" Of course Petrov remembered that. The cold lasted 4 months, and nearly 1/5 of the people in border town starved to death due to the greed of municipal administrative governor Reynolds. There was also opposition brewing among the nobles. Some even demanded Reynolds to be penalized. But this incident finally resulted in 0 consequences for him, simply for the fact that he was the husband of the Duke's second daughter. Now that the prince brought up this issue, Petrov had a bad feeling. "It's worse," said Roland with a sigh. "I'm afraid we only have enough for 2 months if we trade wheat the way we used to. My people can't survive winter with so little food. The ways of the past must be abolished." Petrov opened his mouth, but did not know how to refute the prince's words. He wasn't a professional diplomat, and hearing such good reason, he had no choice but to pause. "Your Highness, I'm sorry about this. The tragedy will never happen. I'll persuade the 6 big families to lend you food for a month. Your people can return them next year, when the production is resumed. If I sold the ore to Willowtown, I won't need to repay the food so slowly. But there's no but. Roland interrupted. They're willing to buy ore with gold royals and sell their wheat, cheese, bread, and honey at market prices. They can sell anything that can be bought with gold royals. Not to mention, Mr. Ambassador, even if you're willing to lend us 1 month's worth of food, would the other 5 families agree with your decision? As far as I know, it's not easy to reach an agreement with Duke Ryan. Petrov fell into silence. Prince Roland was right. He was not confident in persuading his father, least of all the other 5 big families. To maintain their monopoly, they must change the trading scheme. But he simply had no right to give the final word. He held the title of an ambassador, but he was nothing more than a mouthpiece in reality. Perhaps the Duke did not want anyone to make private agreements with Bordertown. The current agreement withstood, whether it was with the former lord or with Prince Roland. That was why the Duke assigned different candidates every season, and they were never the ones in charge of their families. Regardless of the outcome, he had to give it a try. With such resolution, Petrov showed the last of his cards. 30%. He stretched out 3 fingers. The stronghold will buy the ore and gemstones at a price 30% lower than the market price. I think our offer should be higher than that of Willowtown, Your Highness. Roland threw up his hands and said, the old question remains. Can you make that decision for the 6 families? I'll go back to Longsong's stronghold tomorrow. I'll come up with a new contract after reaching an agreement. But my people can't wait that long. You should know that it often takes forever for nobles to reach an agreement. Your Highness, working with Longsong's stronghold is the better choice for you and your people. Willowtown is too far away, and even though you could go there during the months of demons, Petrov said and felt his throat became dry, the journey is dangerous. Good God, what am I doing? His heart was pounding. Am I threatening a prince? Ah! Roland unexpectedly did not fly into a rage, but laughed instead. Mr. Ambassador, you seem to have made some mistakes. I haven't thought of going to Willowtown. You mean? Of course, I don't intend to go to Longsong's stronghold either. Roland looked at the ambassador with interest. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, Petrov suspected that he misheard the prince. Fortunately, the prince broke the silence and explained himself. I'm staying in Bordertown this winter. Bordertown will become the new border of the Kingdom of Graycastle. Don't be surprised, my friend. This is not me saying nonsense. I'll take you to the new wall at the foot of North Slope Mountain for a visit. City wall? Yes, the city wall is a stone wall of about 4 meters high and 2 meters wide, connecting Northern Slope and the Redwater River. With the wall, we can fight off the demonic beasts in Bordertown. Petrov felt his brain was not working. The former ambassador had not mentioned any city wall. Back then, the lord of Bordertown was from Longsong's stronghold. How could he send the limited manpower he had to build the wall? In other words, did Prince Roland begin building the walls as soon as he arrived? Even so, it had been only 3 months. How could they have built something like that in such a short time? Wait a minute, what did His Highness say? Is it about 4 meters high and 2 meters wide, connecting Northern Slope and the Redwater River? Petrov calculated in his mind. It would take years to build such a wall. Firstly, he did not have enough masons to cut and grind the stones. Bordertown was not like Graycastle, and most people who lived here were poor laborers. He had yet to digest the news when Roland's next words shocked him again. As for the sales of the ore, I can slash the price by half from next year, my good sir. But I won't sell all of them to Longsong's stronghold, for you won't need so much ore. I think compared to the low profits the ores make, you'll prefer metal products like spades, shovels, and things like those. He paused for a moment, seeming to wait for Petrov to absorb his words. As for the raw gemstones, they'll be sold to the highest bidder through an auction. I'd like to sell them at a good price after the gem is cut, but unfortunately no one in Bordertown has that ability. Do you even have the ability to build a city wall in a few months? Petrov screamed from the bottom of his heart. And what did he mean by saying the stronghold not needing so many ores? Besides, it already took a whole year for them to produce 1,000 gold royals. Even if there will be an increase in the production, it'll be doubled at best. Was he saying that the stronghold can't even take in ore's worth of 2,000 gold royals? That was too presumptuous of him. He tried hard to suppress his frustration and maintain the last of his etiquette. Your Highness, I've memorized everything you said. I'll return immediately and negotiate with the 6 families. But there's one last thing. The city wall you speak of, I want to go and have a look. Of course. Roland smiled. You don't need to be in such a rush. Enjoy the pastries of King City first. It's not too late to go then, right? Mr. Ambassador. The winter's first rainfall finally arrived, lasting for 2 days. Roland leaned against his working desk and looked out at the hazy town and rain through the window. The wind brought a shower of rain against the window, causing bursts of ripples. The town's silhouetted outline became distorted through the ripples. The houses and the extensions of the streets seemed bent and deformed, in contrast with their tidy look in the past. Due to the lack of effective drainage measures, the crisscross flagstone pavement became overflowing with accumulated water. From afar, the water on the road looked like many little crystalline brooks. The distant mountains and forests were covered with mist, looming and changing like a lost world on Earth. If in modern times, such a landscape would certainly be a tourist attraction, but what Roland wished to see was a jungle made of concrete and steel. Because of the rain, the city wall construction also had to stop. This fact affected his mood and made his previous delight in successfully discouraging the stronghold messenger the day before yesterday fade away. You just said the air around us is made up of lots of different gases. Is that true? Anna's clear voice interrupted Roland's thoughts, while she looked at him curiously, blinking her beautiful blue eyes. Ahem, Miss Anna, you should address His Highness with honorifics, warned the chief knight next to her. Don't make a fuss about it. Roland turned around. She's now my student. Since it was raining and they had not much business, he called Carter and the 2 witches to attend his class. Yes, he had decided to give a small lecture on natural science. He was inspired by stonemason Carl's college. If a mason could open a school, then a mechanical engineer like himself could open one too. Why did discrimination exist? Was not it because of ignorance? During any period of history, universal education was the most effective way to promote the development of civilization. He originally wanted the assistant minister to attend the class too, but the latter was too busy with other administrative tasks and politely declined his offer. Roland did not know why, but since the beginning of the winter, Barov seemed to be overzealous and took charge of all the daily management of Border Town all alone. At the prospect of gaining new knowledge, Anna's eyes immediately sparkled with curiosity. Nana also became happy, for she did not need to treat any wounded animals. As for Carter, since he had nothing special to do, he attended the class to see what new nonsense the prince had thought of. But not long after the class had begun, the knight's eyes became drowsy. Nana also had a bewildered look, her eyes staring at the words natural science. It seemed that Anna had only grasped the general idea, trying hard to remember everything she had heard. Roland could not help but stop the lecture for a moment, letting the 3 of them contemplate on his lecture. As for Anna's question, he smiled and nodded. Of course, even though they look alike. Your Highness, I don't understand. Since they all look the same, how can you tell that they're different gases? Carter expressed his doubts. I can prove it to you. Roland knew that using only words, most of the people would be confounded by listening to these theories. He decided to make them interested by showing them the example of a simple experiment. A candle, a glass, a wooden basin, a bowl of clear lime water. He had prepared these things in advance. Although at this time, they only had pale brown glass, which was far less transparent than normal glass, it could still serve the purpose of the experiment. After all, there was no need to observe the modification process during this simple experiment. Roland had done the experiment beforehand, and the results showed that although magic existed in this world, the rules of nature were still the same as on Earth. He let Anna light the candle and put it in the basin. The process of burning requires a specific gas. This gas is also related to all life. If we stop breathing it, we'll be like this candle. Take a look. Roland put the glass on the candle, and after the flame shook a few times, it soon went out. It exhausted the air. Your Highness, this is not surprising. the chief knight said disapprovingly. "Of course we'll die without air, for example, if we fall into the water." Nana nodded repeatedly. "So, do you think that there's nothing in the glass anymore?" Roland asked, and then poured the lime water into the basin. The waterline rose quickly and stopped rising when half of the glass was filled. This was a classic experiment, often used by most elementary school teachers to arouse children's interest in natural science. Until today, Roland still remembered the shock he felt when his teacher had demonstrated it. It was at that moment that he embarked on the road of science and engineering without looking back. He gently lifted a corner of the glass, and instantly bubbles of air could be seen rising out of the lime water. Then, the clear lime water appeared to be a little bit cloudy, and some white particles slowly spread within the glass. If there was nothing in the glass, we wouldn't see any bubbles or changes on the water surface. This proves that the air contains at least two different kinds of gases. In reality, burning a candle consumes only a part of the air, while the other part doesn't take part in the burning process. Though they are both colorless and odorless, their nature is the complete opposite. Well, that seems to be the case. Carter thought for a long time before figuring out the relationship between the two. But what's the use for knowing this? If we can obtain the former gas, then we can let the flame burn longer. And if we obtain the other gas, we can quickly extinguish the flame. Anna suddenly said, "What a genius!" Roland praised her silently. Even though she made a small error, she had shown herself to be a genius by suggesting separation and purification of gases before use. She had not received any systematic modern education, but yet she could quickly think of this point. This showed that her logical skills were far beyond those of normal people, at least far better than those of his chief knight. Correct, since the time humans learned to use fire, they were separated from the animals. Perhaps it all started as a coincidence, a lightning that hit a tree and lit it up, or a spark generated between two rocks. But if no one had noticed it and tried using it, we would still be the same as animals, Roland replied patiently. The goal of this experiment is to show you that curiosity and thinking are the driving forces for human progress. There are many similar forces hidden in nature, waiting for us to discover and use them. After he finished, Carter still had a doubtful look while Nana was staring at Roland with open eyes, amazed but unable to comprehend what he meant. Only Anna gazed down as if she was thinking about something. Well, Roland sighed that, indeed, teaching advanced theories would not bring enlightenment, and it would only make people confused. Their intellectual level determined that they would not be able to understand the significance of these forces unless they saw it with their own eyes. Only then they would understand how amazing the hidden forces in nature were. At this moment, the kettle hanging from the mantel gave off a clanging sound, the sound of the steam hitting against the lid. "Ah, the water is boiled." The knight walked over to remove the kettle with a fork, and soon the sound stopped. He wrapped a piece of cloth around the handle, and then filled everyone's cups with water. Take this for example. Roland reached out for the cup and felt the temperature of the handle. From the discovery of fire, the principle of boiling water became a reality. Numerous people had witnessed boiling water and used it, but no one thought that the gently curling and rising water vapor could also contain such a tremendous amount of energy. In a few hundred years, it would become the driving force behind humankind's development, and it would quickly change the history of mankind. Although the principle was simple, due to limited technology, it would not be the first choice when it came to farming. But this world was different, he thought. There are witches here. Using magic to fight wars was the way of barbarians. Instead, applying magic to create and to replace some of the key technologies to make civilization develop faster was the correct way to use magic. They chatted until the sun set, and after having dinner together, Roland went to his bedroom. There was no nightlife in that era, and most people went to bed early if they did not make love. He had previously considered taking advantage of his position as a prince and calling a maid to do some physical activities. But in the end, he was too embarrassed to do it. Right after he lit the candle in his room, he heard the sound of applause behind him, and then someone spoke. It was a spectacular lecture. "I didn't expect your highness was actually a learned man." It was the voice of an unknown woman. Roland instantly felt cold sweat on his forehead. If she could and would suddenly appear like this in his room without giving him notice, what else could she be if not an assassin? He immediately ran towards the door, but before he could reach the doorknob, he felt a cold wind blowing next to his ear. When he was back to his senses, he found a silver dagger firmly logged into the door, with only a finger's width to his cheek. "Don't be frightened, Your Highness. I don't intend to hurt you. I only wish to talk to you." "Damn, what sort of talk is this?" Roland swallowed and slowly turned around. Under the threat of a dagger, he could only wait for the other side to speak. In the shadow of candlelight, Roland saw the other person. She was sitting on his bed, her body hidden under a robe and a hood hiding her face, so he could not see her clearly. Candlelight cast her shadow over a large part of the wall. "Who are you?" "I have no name. My sisters call me Nightingale." She stood up, pulled up her robe, and made a curtsy as properly as any lady. "First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to you, Your Royal Highness Roland Wimbledon." "Gratitude?" Roland noticed that the pattern on her robe shimmered peculiarly in candlelight. 3 parallel triangles with the shape of an eye. Where had he seen this before? The pattern on the coin is the insignia of the sacred mountain and the magic eye. It's the emblem of the witch's cooperation. What Berev had told him flashed in his mind. "You're a witch?" "Ah!" She let out a string of chuckles. "Your Royal Highness is quite knowledgeable." After recognizing the identity of the other party, Roland was silently relieved. It seemed that she was not an assassin sent by his siblings. "So, you've come to this distant town for the sake of the witch in the North Slope mine area? Although I have no idea how you received this information, you came much too late. If I had wanted to hang her, she'd be long dead. I'm aware of that. And if you had done it, I'd have no wish to speak to you." Nightingale sat back down on the bed. The Witch Cooperation Association prefers not to intervene in secular affairs, especially with royalty. But I prefer not to listen to them. It may be improper to kill a prince for a witch, but it's still within my power to leave a deep enough impression on you. It was an explicit threat, but Roland regained his composure. "She's alive and well. I'm also aware that there is another girl, Nana." She nodded. "I visited this place a week ago, but I didn't meet you. I've been watching all that you've been doing, and while I don't understand why it's that you don't have the typical hostility against us witches, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Witches Cooperation Association. You've been here for a week." Roland wiped his forehead. "She's seen everything?" This had been going on for a week, and he did not notice anything. "So, tell me, did you come here to talk? Or just to thank me? Isn't it tiring to stand while speaking to me?" She said as she lowered her hood. "Come here and talk. I'm not ugly. My appearance won't scare your highness." She was more than not ugly. In fact, one could almost say that she was pretty. With her hood now lowered, Nightingale's golden wavy hair fell down like a cascade, dancing under the candlelight. Her nose was long and her eyes sparkled. Unlike Nana and Anna's childish faces, hers showed an air of maturity. Though in the dark one could not fully perceive her face, the delicate and well-proportioned shadows on her face could serve as enough proof of her beauty. Roland slowly walked across the room and sat next to her on the bed. He was doing so not because her beauty made him forget possible dangers, but rather because he simply believed that she was not malicious. "You can talk now. Sure enough, you're not afraid of me." The woman sounded happy. "I can see now that you're different from those people. They hate us because they're afraid of us, and I can see the fear in their eyes. But as for you," she could not help reaching out her hand to gently stroke Roland's cheek. "You're only curious." Roland made an awkward little cough and turned his head. He really wasn't sure what to think about this change in character. Just a moment ago, she was a deadly assassin, but now she was an overbearing master diplomat. Fortunately, the woman quickly suppressed her emotions. "I came here to tell you that I'd like to take Anna and Nana with me." "No way," Roland said without thinking, his heart pounding. Fearing that his sudden exclamation might annoy Nightingale, he added, "They're well cared for here, and no one can hurt them. Besides, where do you want to take them? This is the safest place. I'll bring them to the Witches Cooperation Association, and that's their destination." Nightingale was not brought down by the refusal and kept a calm tone. The members of the community are their companions. There's no discrimination, no persecution. There's no need for them to hide who they are. And where exactly is the Witches' Cooperation Association located? Or is it that you have no fixed location? A month ago, my guards found your camp in Misty Forest, and now the signs show you've been traveling north. What's in the north other than endless mountains? You're right. We're currently hiding in a place in the mountains where witches can be completely safe from harm. And just how safe is it to live like a savage in the mountains over winter? Will they have clean drinking water? Enough food? A warm dwelling place? And with the months of demons coming, the whole Northwest will be dangerous. What in the world are you thinking? Roland stopped short. What had Bearov said, exactly? Witches traveled to Holy Mountain with the intent of finding true tranquility. The Witches' Cooperation Association was launched in order for witches to travel together to Holy Mountain. No way. Were they? Are you going to the impassable mountain range to try and find Holy Mountain? I have nothing to say on this subject. Nightingale smiled, but her look told Roland clearly what to think regarding his speculation. That being the case, I can never let them go with you, Roland said. In just 2 months, the demonic beasts will prevail outside the domains. And even if you can avoid humans in the mountains, you won't be able to avoid the demonic beasts. Holy Mountain can be found at any time. You should come to Border Town for winter, and stay here until it has passed. It was Nightingale's turn to be stunned. Stay here? You really are a funny man. She thought for a moment, and then shook her head. Your Highness, you aren't afraid of witches, but yet this doesn't mean that everyone else is the same. As soon as we're exposed to the crowd, the church will soon come knocking at the door. As long as the witches can help ease the burden of the months of demons, my people will realize that they're not evil. Before Roland could open his mouth to speak, Nightingale stopped him. Besides this, we have another thing to consider. Anna is about to reach adulthood. Adulthood? Yes. As if seeing through Roland's doubt, Nightingale calmly explained. Adulthood is the first hurdle all witches need to cross. Usually the sooner one becomes a witch, the harder it's to cross the hurdle. Your Highness, do you know why we're seen as the embodiment of the devil?